right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined by my brother from Ireland, Uberboyo. How you doing today, sir?
Good, my man. Feeling fresh. So thank you very much for asking. And yeah, looking forward to chatting again, seeing what's going on. I believe we're talking about manliness and the raging against the dying light. The decline, I guess, is probably going to be relative to this as well. So
yeah,
look forward to chatting about it.
Well, I reached out to you because I've seen, now that we were talking privately, Twitter's sort of more of an open platform now. And I saw some of the stuff about you getting into martial arts. Looked like I've seen you kicking some heavy bags and stuff like that, and just talking generally about masculinity. And I thought, come back on. Last time we talked, it was about Nietzschean philosophy and orthodox theology, and so this time I just want to talk more about the state of society, the role of masculinity in the world. And whether you're Nietzschean or whether you're an Orthodox Christian, traditional Christian, there is an impetus to rage against the dying of the light. Now, however you characterize the light. So for our purposes, I said the true, the good, and the beautiful, using a sort of Platonic trinity there. But before we even get into it, how is the whole martial arts thing? I mean, how recently you've been getting into all this stuff?
So I've actually been doing it for quite a while. Like, I'm Irish, so I remember my story. I was in university, and sitting in university, I was having the academics there giving me Communist Manifesto. They're giving me Judith Butler. They give me critical theory in its early form, later evolved into... And they're educating me with all this stuff. And I remember it's quite interesting because as a young man, I didn't intellectually understand how pernicious this was. Mm-hmm. But as a young man, there's something very interesting about this as a phenomenon. And this is going to become a big part of what we're going to talk about. As a young man, that's not empowering. That's putting in information into my head, filling my head and turning me into a dork, turning me into a nerd. I'm becoming an information guy, getting all these weird concepts about the world and taking all my creative energy and focusing on this, and I'm getting lost in the abstractions, and the bad abstractions even worse. Now, I felt incompetent. I felt not good enough. I'm a young dude. I want to be handsome. I want to be strong. I want to be impressive. I want to be skilled. Right. And I felt like the more I was in college, I got none of those things. I expected to go to college to get developed, to become something competent. And so eventually I dropped out. I remember my gut said, I'm getting information, not skills. It was that simple. It wasn't like intellectually sophisticated. But I realized in college I wasn't getting the skills. I wasn't learning how to speak better or write better or do anything physically at all. There was nothing like that. Maybe a gym I could go to. Right. And so I basically I stopped going to college. And I was sort of still enrolled, but I would instead of going to college in the morning, I traveled to I went to a poet for a while. That was one of my first things. I found this poet, and she was teaching me how to write. It was one of my friend's mothers. And then I went to a public speaking thing, and I started to go to acting classes, and I started going to music, and I started going to singing classes and guitar classes and all these type of things. And eventually I was like, this is the way. I'm learning stuff. I'm becoming better. I wake up every day and I'm like, I can feel my fingers get faster in the guitar, stuff like this. I'm thinking to myself, my God, this is exactly the feeling I wanted to feel. As a young man, you want to feel yourself expand in your creative capacity and your power. And then I was doing that, and then I just dropped out of college. And when I dropped out of college, I moved into this shitty little apartment, sleeping on the mattress on the floor. I remember there was bugs and everything. It was horrible. And this mattress on the floor, I had no money. And I was in training mode. And that point, I was about 22, I'd say, or 21, 22. I went and I started to look for a local gym. Uh-huh. And then I was sort of saying to myself, I should go and I should learn to fight, because I was living with somebody who was a boxer, and me and him would box together, and he would wall up me. He's going to give me sore jaw every single time. And I was like, man, this sucks. So he took me to boxing a couple of times, and Irish boxing is just so fun. It's crazy. It's really, really good, integrated into the culture here. But I started to go to a Muay Thai gym. I found this local Muay Thai gym, and I went there, and that was like kickboxing.
How long ago was that?
And that was, oh man. So this happened, to give you the timing, because I can't remember the exact dates, because that time in my life was a bit of a blur. I was just so focused, I became not really tangible. Jordan Peterson blew up in about 2017. Yeah, this happened just as Conor McGregor blew up. So I remember I went to the Muay Thai gym, and that Muay Thai gym was basically a part of Conor McGregor's gym. But Conor McGregor was not famous. He was in the UFC. and he was doing well, but he wasn't like what he was.
Right.
And I remember I joined and I was fighting, and like 4 months later, Conor fought Chad Mendes, and then he fought Aldo. And that was like 2015.
Right.
So that was the huge fights that he had. And I remember being there, and it was like one of those moments where you feel like, you probably felt it in America when Trump kicked off. It was one of those moments where you feel like there's this collective energy happening. Because I remember we would come in and the guys would be like, have you seen how well Conor's doing? Because they all knew him. And then they were like talking about it. And this, all of a sudden I see this Irish guy and I'm like, holy shit, I'm studying these martial arts. And here's this superhero after showing up that's representative of this.
Right.
And so that's where I kind of got into it. And it was just such an amazing contrast between that and college. You know, in college, it's all jargon, academies. It's obviously, I learned later, it's so pernicious.
Yep.
Martial arts, it's very polite, very honorable, very brutal, and very binary. You either can do it or you can't.
Right.
And your coaches want to help you do it, but your coaches will be tough on you and they teach you on all those types of physical disciplines. So that's how I got into it.
Well, that's, you know, and just highlighting on that dichotomy between like academia and martial arts is, when I was in my undergraduate, I was competing in a yet less useful martial art. So Muay Thai, you know, elbows, knees. Taekwondo is almost more of a sport. A lot of jump kicks, high kicks. You don't want to do that when you're on the street. But I was competing in Taekwondo before I started traveling to China and really getting into East Asian culture and philosophy and stuff like that. But the competitiveness, you know, one of the things that I realized when I got to my PhD program, I actually was reprimanded. I had to have a private meeting with some of the powers that be, because I was too challenging to people's ideas. Now we would have these, you know, meetings and you know, particularly there was some female Muslims, and we're all PhD students. We're supposed to be doing this high level academic stuff, and they were coming up with ideas that was just stupid. And so I wasn't saying they're dumb, but, you know, criticizing them, you know, in the classroom setting, and, oh no, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. You know, this is way too aggressive for the academic. And it's like, well, I thought we were PhDs. I thought the whole point was like, you know, iron sharpens iron. We're supposed to get down to the truth here. And it's not. It's totally feminized. There's no competitiveness. They don't want you to compete. In fact, that idea is like they're trying to take it out of higher learning, at least where I was particularly. So maybe other places it's a little bit different. But competitiveness is essential for masculinity. And we can look at our societies now, and it seems like they're becoming less and less competitive on a deliberate effort by, the powers that be to, in a way, feminize society. And so, I saw recently, maybe you can speak to this, that Ireland seems to be rising up a bit in regards to all this illegal immigration. And again, how they're the Great Reset, how they're trying to flood the Western world. They're doing the same thing in the United States with Central American, immigrants. But speak a little bit to, your experience as an Irishman, especially one who is very prideful in being Irish and the heritage, that finally it seems like normal, regular, normie people are starting to wake up and go out in the street and protest. What's going on over in Ireland?
Well, all right, I'll actually definitely touch on the point of competitiveness. First of all, Taekwondo. So Taekwondo is definitely, I wouldn't say it's a complete martial arts because it does lack like certain aspects of sparring. But my God, man, I fought against a Taekwondo champion recently. He was like some Olympic champion, and I was sparring with him. And it's like, bro, that dude, if you're just like a second off and he gets a kick off, it's like getting hit by a baseball bat. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's what we do. It's just all kicks. High kicks too. So body mid body kicks, head kicks. It's like that's all you train, and jump kicks, stuff like that.
And this is the thing, is that like some people would say, oh, maybe not the most effective thing. Like Joe Rogan himself experienced that when he goes into the UFC. He realizes if he can't wrestle, he's screwed.
Right.
But at the same time, like if I'm sparring that dude, I realize that all I can do is basically I'm gonna take 4 or 5 kicks here before I get close to this guy, and that's what you sort of have to do.
Did you take one? Did you actually get hit by one pretty directly?
By the way, oh man, all the time, sparring this motherfucker all the time, like, because it's Taekwondo teaches you an awful lot of evasive practices.
Yes.
So you're kind of like, right, you're gonna try walk him down.
Yeah,
you're not gonna be as fast
as him,
and he'll just spin. It's a pain in the ass. Spinning back kicks,
Yes.
He spins. He gets you right in the diaphragm. You're like,
oh yeah.
And then you're sparring, so you can't actually hit him super hard. So it's like you're not going to go and try and knock him out or anything like that, because that's just like rude. So you're just going to take a lot of like punches because he hits you in the body more than the head, which so this type of thing.
Right.
But competitiveness then, so to kind of come as a contrast related to that, I guess, is that, yeah, I absolutely see that evaporate from the world. And I noticed that when I dropped out, that was the first thing I came in contact with. Is there was this I was getting tested. There was a standard that I was getting tested to try to discover, was I good enough, basically. And there was this hunger, this anger in me that wanted that. I was like, find a way to test me, please. Show me how I can rub myself up against something and see if I'm worthy, see if I'm good enough, so I can evolve to that level. You know, it was like, I want to find the iron so iron can sharpen iron.
Right.
And I could not find that in the education system. I felt that was very difficult. So all I did was resort to taking a fuckload of drugs and stuff like this, being a degenerate dork and all this, and going along with that culture. And and then you go and maybe you want to do intellectual stuff, and it's just not really there. You know, I'm going to argue about Marxist theory. It just didn't feel interesting. Or you're going to take that competitive edge, arguing about Judith Butler. It just never really evoked anything in me. Instead, it was just weird, man. It was just a weird energy altogether. And I broke out of that, absolutely, and that was a big deal. And what you see in Ireland, maybe it's not so directly related, but you have this culture that we have come out of. This is a Western problem generally, where an awful lot of those assertive virtues, setting boundaries, you could say they're the male instincts, literally like testosterone's ideology manifest, setting boundaries, calling out what is true or false, you know, like binary discussions about what is clearly reality, like arguments, debates, head on head to try to figure out what's real, and not getting emotional about it, you know, like two guys fighting and then at the end shaking hands and being like, that was a good fight, better man won.
Often you become friends with the people you fight. It's just the way guys are, man. It's brilliant. It's amazing. Like some of the best and some of the most reliable friends you'll ever have is like sparring partners. Yeah, because the two of you are like, you know, we're a team. You know, it's just so emotionally you bond so deeply. Right. And so all those instincts in our world, you could say they're subverted. There definitely are, but we've also lost them. Like it's just a weakness inside of us. Like in the West, we've lost an ability to acknowledge that part of it. It's like comfort kills excellence. We'd like to maybe make it more romantic, but there's also an aspect of just blunt laziness and comfort that comes into it too. Right. And then there's various forces that take advantage of that and then push that even further and then try to, you know, it's obviously their ability to gain power. And all of this goes together to create a very, very weak, docile population who are unable to stand by their assertive men. Maybe they don't even have that many assertive men. Right. Or most importantly, they demoralize their men so they don't become assertive. Right. And then you can just do all sorts of crazy, egregious things to them, you know. And then think of Ireland 80 years ago. There was, you know, a dude my age would have been handed some type of like homemade rifle and been told to go and join the IRA or something like this. And look at us now. You know, look at us now. Like we're all sitting around and we're just cooking completely to the plan. Yeah, well, to that point, you know, there's a YouTube channel that I've promoted before called Kings and Generals, and it's a great. Are you familiar? Yeah, it's a great YouTube channel, and one of the biggest takeaways, if you start watching that, is the amount of men. So in all these different nation states, whether it's talking about the Ottomans or the Holy Roman Empire or the French or whatever point in history you're looking at, is that men often died in battle. And so you start looking around at these contemporary Western societies and you see how soft, how weak, how feminized men are. And it's like they have nothing ultimately to die for. And so that was one of the things I wanted to bring up with you today is, you're talking about boundaries and masculinity. One of the metaphors that I talk about is men are, in a way, the castle walls. They define the boundaries of culture, of civilization, of society, of what are the acceptable norms. And the women and the children are sort of the jewels inside the castle. And so when we look at the transgender ideology, this blending of opposites, so it's like the castle walls are being dissolved, and then the women and the children are being looted. We're seeing pedophilia. We're seeing men in female sports. The people that need to be protected, the children and the women, are the ones that are actually being violated the most by this whole dissolution of boundaries in our society, and that men have to stand up and define something. And I think when you look at the average Western man, like you would ask them, like, what would you die for? What are you willing to defend to the death? A lot of they don't have much. Maybe their access to pornography. I don't know, you know. And so, you know, reflect on that a little bit. Like for you yourself, I mean, what is the defining line that you yourself you think would be willing to die for, and how do you think that is tied to masculinity?
It's a good question, man. Because I remember I had this thought around about this period I was talking about, that I was pining. It's so interesting that, like, you know, your emotions, you're a man, and so you have a sort of biochemistry that's going to get you to think a certain way. So this is such an interesting, for like a young mid-20s, early 20s Irish guy, and I'm sitting there and I'm pondering to myself, it's like, would I die for this country? Because I remember going around that country at the time, and the big votes that came in were like the abortion vote. These all happened while I was there. I remember I lived through these, you know, and I remember the big abortion movement, and then the marriage one, the Gay Marriage Act, and all this stuff.
Yep.
And you know, back then I wasn't really aware of what was going on. I didn't understand how pernicious that stuff actually was.
Right.
But I remember it didn't speak to me. It wasn't talking to me. It wasn't anything to do with me. Like, that was actually my attitude. It's like, people were like, "What's your stance on this?" And I was like, "I don't fucking care. Like, there's nothing to do with me." You know? Right. Trump was very interesting in the same way. Trump shows up and people come in and they tell me, "What's your political opinion?" And it's like, he's an American fucking politician. I don't care. I don't know anything about him. Like, what's going on with this? And I remember my specific interests were like self-improvement, excellence, development, and all these type of things. But I remember sitting down then, and at one point I had this thought. It's like, man, someone my age would be charging into a trench, you know, holding a bayonet, likely to take a bullet. Right. Like, why would I do that for the Irish nation? Would I die for it? And I was kind of thinking, no, I definitely wouldn't. Like, what the hell would I even fight for? Like, what am I trying to defend here, you know? And I remember feeling that, and I started asking loads of my friends. And this is it. And so I started asking a lot of my friends, and they were sort of like, "Yeah, I don't really see the point either. It seems stupid. Like, wars are just for rich men," or something like this. And this is what's so interesting about the thing recently, is that finally you see some Irish guys. This happened across the West. I think the Americans really pushed it forward with the Trump thing. Mm-hmm. But this happened across the West, where the Irish are sort of saying, like, I'm not sure if it's manly per se, as manly as I'd like it to be, but it's definitely like them putting a foot down and saying, use the regime is coming in here and allowing these vulture funds from New York to buy up all our housing, put all the natives out homeless, charge the natives tax, take that tax and take in all these other people and fund them to go into houses while our people are homeless. Right. And there's that fundamental instinct of like, that level of cuckoldry and getting screwed, where people are just like, "I've had enough. You're going to stand for something there. You're going to at least defend yourself." And I'm delighted to see it finally, because it's really so demoralizing to see people be pathetic. That's even worse than people, you know, it's worse to feel pathetic than to be oppressed. That's actually worse, you know? Right. And so,
no, and I would say that's part of the demoralization, that you just look at some of the psychological operations, MK Ultra. I mean, how do you mind program somebody? You have to break their psyche. You have to demoralize them. Gaslighting, that's a psychological operation to make you question your own sanity, so that you will then resort to the system itself for understanding how the world is. And so, you know, we see in the gaslighting all over the place. I don't need to get into the pandemic and some of the health measures that were put forth there, but you know, look at all the people dying suddenly and stuff like that. But you know, you nailed it in regards to what would we die for as an American, for example. And as a Christian, I've thought about this. I recently was talking with a young man who's one of the premium members on my side. We were talking. He was kind of thinking about going into the military, becoming a Marine. He had family that was in the military, and at the same time, he gets the larger picture of what's going on in our society. And so, you know, last night we were chatting, and I was like, "Well, what is it exactly that you know? Why would you want to go into the Marines?" And it's really the man, that the image of what the military used to be. So the man that came out of the military, the discipline, the physicality, the physique, the skill set, the competency, again, in that ability to instantiate violence. Right, that's a masculine quality. So we're talking about the martial arts and all this different stuff. A man who like has lost his violent edge, it is a sort of pathetic man, because a man that can potentially be violent but restrains violent, that's why then you would respect a man like that. And whether it be martial arts, I guarantee you that your sparring partners or men in the gym, the biggest guys in the gym are often the nicest guys. The guys that are the most violent killers in the gym, they're often the nicest guys, because they don't have this sense of like trying to prove something all the time. So when we look at the perniciousness and the cattiness of like Western men, these are men that have no violent edge. They need to be smacked in the mouth a few times. They need to actually be dealt with other men, other competencies and stuff like that. But it's so sad. You look at the Western world, you know, there's not much to defend anymore. And so for me, it's like my family, you know, will be my wife, my children, and for me, my tradition. That's about the only things that I'm willing to die for. In regards to the American enterprise, it's basically, I see that it's basically already ended. It's kind of over. That game's already been lost. But it was really inspiring to see what's going on in Ireland, where you look at the UK, and maybe this is just our faulty perception here in America. I mean, we tend to really criticize and make fun of some of the English guys, because from our side, it looks like their culture is so damn cucked. And I did see some protests in the UK regarding the BBC and some of the stabbies, and the data regarding that. But you're from our side, other than we saw the Italians protest, Eastern Europe seems to stand up still. But then Ireland seems like you guys in the UK, you guys are really the only ones that, I mean, how do you see it? I mean, you live there. We just have a media perception that's so faulty, it's hard to even know what reality is.
Bro, it's fascinating you say that, because that's still in effect with us. You turn on the news here in Ireland, you don't see any talk about what's going on. It's all spread via the internet. You understand why the censorship is so serious, because if there wasn't the internet, it wouldn't exist. It's blocked out. These bad things that people don't want to. You obviously don't want to show that on TV, because it might stir ferment and then it become a big thing. But I'll say a couple of things though, because I love the Irish, and I love the energy that they can bring. And it's great to see them finally put the foot down and say, like, we actually have standards. We're not just going to get rolled over like losers. But man, I got to give you credit. Like, maybe you're looking at us now and you're inspired, but the Americans pushed the tempo in 2000. Like, yous did this first,
right?
And I actually got to give credit to the likes of England and Germany and all them, because they pushed it around about the same time as you.
Okay,
like that was a big strong energy that came from them. It was very like that whole conversation started with the Americans. They were vanguarding it, and then the Europeans at the same time. I could say sort of like France, Germany, Italy, England, the classic big dogs in Europe. They really, really pushed that forward, and we are only catching up for a variety of different reasons.
Okay.
Like, this is actually that energy coming maybe like a couple of years late, because it wasn't that big of a deal for us. Like, you could say the project had very small numbers back then, and so people weren't even noticing this stuff. But recently, they've really sat down and ramped it up an absolutely insane amount. So it's great to see it, but it's not necessarily. It's not like what I'd love it to be, which is a lot of guys get around and stand on first principles and say, what do we stand for? And put the foot down and assert a reality. It's like a reaction, It's gotten to the point now where people are starting to react against it. And and then what's great about the Irish instincts is we have a very guilt-free understanding of ourselves. We're the Irish nation. We've like a very good conscience about who we are. And now that's getting stirred up. People are like, when the Irish get rowdy, like they're like, all right, we know who we are. We're not letting this type of bullshit happen. And I think that might be the downside of the bigger places like England and even America, but especially like England and Germany, is that they have a huge amount of guilt. This is like a Nietzschean conception. The masters have the problem of being naive, and they suffer from guilt, and the slaves have the problem of being losers, and they use resentment to make the masters feel guilty. So the colonies, Ireland being one, always shame the Brits, and the Brits feel guilty about this. And so when the Brits try to have a positive identity, same with the Americans, and the Americans as the colonists or the people who enslaved the blacks and stuff like this, the guilt is very, very strong. And so they that's like a psychological hurdle that they've really struggled to get over. And I think that's why England might be particularly bad.
No, that's a great point about the guilt, because I would agree with you that here in the U.S., I live in the Midwest, so outside these large cities, it is still traditional America. Most people are probably Protestants or somewhere adjacent to Protestant Christianity, but guns, patriotism, private property, like these things are real things. But it's like here in the U.S., we feel so confined because the infrastructure of America itself has been hijacked by a small number of people, and so it's like we have this massive country compared to any European country, and we have a spirit of revolution, or at least revolting against powers that be, that I would say Europe doesn't have that same mentality that is kind of embedded within being an American. But at the same time, the last two presidential elections, or the last presidential election, then the last midterm election, I mean, these things were totally phony. Not that previous elections weren't. I mean, it's all been false dialectics between options to vote for. But now the corruption is just so outright, and nobody will do anything about it. Our intelligence agencies, the FBI, the CIA, the DOD, their responsibility is to control us, right? It's not about the foreign wars anymore. It's about the domestic population. And so as Americans, our biggest threat is not really the Chinese, the whole Chinese spy balloon that floated over the U.S. It's the fact that our government's complicit with an agenda to destroy the country itself, because the whole thing about globalism is to destroy national identity. And so the people that run this country, they're literally trying to destroy the country. And it's like there's just this helplessness as any sort of patriotic American, like what you can do. So it's basically just, guns, Bible, family, that's about it. And that's still pretty well and alive. I imagine many people here in the live chat that are Americans, if they live in the Midwest or the Mountain West, they're like, yeah, that's basically the neighborhood I live in too. But California, New York, it's cucked, dude.
It's very interesting because when you look at this stuff, it's quite difficult to model this, to say to yourself, well, what exactly is going on here? Because I guess you need to identify the problem correctly if you want to try to find a solution. So you look at America, and it's very interesting how the collective story has such an influence on the type of person that shows up in America. So, for example, you do have that strong revolutionary bent, but you are also like universal winners. You're the hegemony, you're the big dogs in the game. You do have that problem of slavery, so you have guilt then instantiated in that, and that makes the very unique mix in America, where you have, like, I'm using Nietzsche's conception of master consciousness and slave consciousness in a bit more sophisticated than most people understand it. The master, there's ups and downs. They're not black and white. There's like ups and downs. So the master is powerful, assertive, believes in themselves, but they're also naive, as I said, and they're prone to guilt. Mm-hmm. The slave is a loser, but he's resentful and he's like prone to projecting that guilt. So in America, you have that soup. You have the minorities. They project the guilt upon the redneck Americans who they claim run the government and all this. Right. And then you're kind of saying to yourself, well, how has the American apparatus turned against the rednecks, the conservative right. Flyover country folk? Like, how is that happening? Has the minorities, as the cultural Marxists would say, did they seep into the infrastructure, and then have they started to twist it against it? Are there are there motivated ethnic minorities doing this stuff? For example, this is fascinating with Joe Biden. Well, you have Joe Biden.
Yeah, great point. No, there's no doubt about that.
You have Joe Biden, who's Catholic, Irish, all right? And we have a big resentment against like WASP Americans and British. You obviously he has a load of Jewish people in his cabinet. They've got their little state Israel. We've got our little state Ireland. And then you have in his cabinet as well, like loads of people who are colored and stuff like this. Now, apologies if that is too blunt for YouTube, but obviously we're talking about this in an interesting intellectual way. We've got me, an Irishman, noticing that the person who rules America right now is not, there's no English people in that cabinet. There's no WASPs. No. There's none of the native stock, which is it's like a coalition of the minorities.
Yep.
And that's so interesting to see that psychology happen. The same thing is happening in England. I think England right now has India, and that's the ruled colony. I think there might be a couple of Irish people. I'm not too sure. And I think I don't think there's any British males in it.
Well, and then Pakistan, it seems like England has so many Pakistanis have moved there. I mean, let alone the grooming and rape cults just a few years ago that got uncovered, and how the police failed to prosecute any of that. And so, but you're so right. And I think that's where the LGBTQ, the sexual identities, these are creating minorities out of even, you'd say the domestic stock of people. Well, they just create a new minority by, now you're a furry. Now you think you're a woman. Now, you just have sex with men, and then you purchase babies from women's wombs. And so you look at, like you said, the Biden administration, and that's all of it. It's all different variations of minority groups. And it's all part of this globalism spirit, that so I would argue it is evil, that it is satanic. It's a spirit of the Antichrist itself. And that's why it's moving towards this one world government, which as a Christian, I believe is inevitable. That this is the history of the movement of history itself is going to lead to this global one world religion, one world government, one world structure, and it's going to come through plague and violence and war and taking all our money away and everything.
And this is, so I remember when I was trying to figure this stuff out. So I have a lot of theories on what might be going on here. So I'll suggest one.
Yeah, okay.
Because I remember this from hearing, I think it was Yuri Bezdomov. You know, I'm sure everybody's heard this
I know
before,
Yuri. Oh yeah.
And so that's such a
Canary
fascinating
in the
way.
coal mine.
That's such a fascinating way he spins that, isn't it? Because you've got, like I remember being in college. I spoke about this earlier, and I had all these guys, the Marxists. And I had Judith Butler, and I had critical theory. And as I said, I didn't understand why those ideologies were so pernicious. But when I got older and I started to like actually read Nietzsche myself, and actually read Jung myself, and actually read like various perspectives myself, I started to conceptualize what exactly these people were criticizing.
Right.
What were they giving us? So they were categorizing. They're creating this mental idea that the West was what they call phallogocentric. So it's logos orientated, which is Greek philosophy, Plato. Logos orientated, which is Christian morality, tethered to this as well. So the Platonic logic of Christian morality. And then there's the phallos, which is male.
Yep.
And logic and maleness and Christianity and Platonism and philosophy and Western identity, all these things are a big soup that represent it's almost like a spinal cord, a spiritual spinal cord that holds the West together. And when people go into these colleges, they get educated on Plato, on Augustine, on Nietzsche, who's a commentator and all that, on all these types of characters. They get educated in this spinal cord, and this asserts and reasserts their identity. They understand themselves as Western men, you know, and they realize that the West is for men, and it's their project, and it's their civilization. And all the people I was taught in college, I was never taught that spinal cord. I remember before I dropped out, I stopped going to classes, and I had to go to the library to read Plato, because I was going into these classes, and I had Marxists, and I had critical theorists, and I had Judith Butler telling me that there's this canon, this phallogocentric canon that was bad for all these variety of reasons, because it kept out minorities, because it kept out women, because it kept out queer perspectives, because it kept out this, it kept out that. And I had to go in and I had to actually leave those classes to go study the fucking thing that they were complaining about. And when I go and I study this thing, I'm like, man, this is awesome. Like I remember sitting through Marxist classes and like more like post-Marxist thinkers, which is just all jargon. Yep. And then I read Plato, and Plato is like so elegant and clear. It's like reading a fable for a child. It's just very straightforward. Right. He's very simple language. Right. And I started to see this, and I started to see this when I was older. It's like, man, these guys had just created in the institution. It was like a cancer inside an organ inside the body that was attacking its own spinal cord, you know, and assaulting it. And I was astounded when I saw that. And then I heard Yuri Bezdomov, and he describes this flawlessly. He says, at the center of all the civilizations, you have the religion. And I would like extend that as well and say you've got also the broader parts of the identity, like the you know, the philosophy or the Western canon and the literature and stuff like this. But generally speaking, the true core of that is the religious core of that, which holds everything together. Right. And what the goal of a communist project, a communist revolution, is to go in and attack that spinal cord. So Jesus is not real. God is not real. Right. You know, Plato is phallogocentric, as they call it. Oh, just any concepts at all that cause confusion and get people to look away from this. Right. And then favor the outside. Yep. Till that thing falls apart. And then, now this is the scary part, construct a new spinal cord under your project with your goals, and most importantly with you on top as the brain. And once I heard that, I was like, man, that's some high level thinking, whoever's running that project, but that is scary shit.
Well, you know, speaking and using that metaphor of that sort of the phallogocentric spinal cord, and I've talked about that over and over. You know, Derrida, Jacques Derrida, the French intellectuals, really got going with that concept of the phallogocentrism. So his school of deconstructionism said, well, hey, you know, this is 1950s. If we're going to really have a revolution, so this is before the 1960s counterculture here in America, and that's where Judith Butler comes from, is all these post-Marxist ideologies in the 60s. Like, well, what we have to do is we have to undermine the phallogocentrism, and the way we do that is by privileging the fringes, the minorities, the marginalization. And so the marginal has to become the center, and the center has to become the marginal. And so then we have to do away with the objective truth. And so that's that is in his books, talking about the phallogocentrism as this central pillar, as you're highlighting, that has to be undermined. And we see exactly that. So it gets back right to the Biden administration. We're talking about all these minorities. The marginal has to become the center, the center point, and then the majority has to become the marginal. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this country, and we're seeing it all across Europe. And from a spiritual lens, as an Orthodox Christian, I would say this is sin itself. That sin, by transgressing the objective moral structure of the logos, of God, of Christ, that it only leads to death. So death is sin because death is always self-destructive. It always undermines one's own purpose. And so the only way you can live a better life is to accord oneself to this objective structure of reality and morals and truth and fractals and sacred geometry and language and all this different stuff.
Man, like, again, this is going to be a little bit of a soulless materialist metaphor, but I'm going to run with it anyway.
All right.
To extend what you're saying, to look at this spinal cord as attached to a body, so that's what our civilization is. And that spinal cord is, and this is what's interesting, it privileges masculine assertiveness, because the spinal cord, the male, connected to God through the astral shock there, if you will.
Okay.
And the spinal cord then is standing there, and it's like where the DNA comes from. It says, this is what the structure of society is. This is what the morality is. This is what reality is. Mm-hmm. It creates a structure. That's what a body is. It's a structure created by DNA, created by information that's passed out through the body. And what happens when you age or when you get disease or even when you die is that structure can no longer sustain itself. And so what happens is entropy comes in. All the bacteria that are living on your skin, your immune system stops fighting for your DNA because it's dead.
Right.
And so all that bacteria begins to eat you immediately. And all these things, all the bacteria in your gut and all this stuff, all the entities outside you swoop in and they start to chew everything up. And entropy just basically makes the whole thing implode and fall apart. And what you see about that is death. That's fundamentally, like, entropy is death. Entropy is the decay and death of what's going on. And what you would see happening in that body is that the immune system's not doing its job. The immune system is like sinning, it's not going and it's not stopping these bacteria from attacking the body. It's like letting them come in because it can't do it anymore. It's given up. It's lost its will. It's like an old body can't do it anymore.
Right.
And this is what's so scary. It's almost like AIDS. This phallogocentric ideology comes in and it screws up the central nervous system, the spinal cord, so it can't defend itself anymore.
Right.
And then all these entities swoop in from the outside, chew the whole thing up, and then basically take control of the thing, like parasites and everything.
Somebody making a good point in the chat, but it's tied to what I was talking about with rootlessness of men. And so, like you're talking about, these ideologies come in and it confuses use the metaphor of the body, the psyche, and therefore the body itself stops defending. That men have to be rooted within some perspective of tradition and time and ancestry. And without that, you're rootless, and nothing can grow that has no roots. And so without roots, it equals death, and you just atrophy. And we look at the feminization of men in the West. We look at even the testosterone rates, the skeletal structure. I mean, the width of shoulders, like men just aren't looking the way they used to look. And this is part of a lack of purpose, a lack of structure, a lack of rootedness, a lack of tradition. And it's just a nasty perpetual process that, because they don't know what to do, then they just feed on their own pleasure. And a man cannot be led by pleasure. Hedonism, I think, is the death to masculinity. Because as you're talking about going to martial arts or sparring or getting in shape, everything that we respect men for takes a lot of effort and discipline. And that's really what we look for when we look at great men. We look at something that takes effort, competency, skill, discipline, and it could be whatever. You could be an artist. You could be it doesn't matter what it is, but as men, that's what we look for. That's what we look to. And you look at our cultures and who are the competent people? Who are the competent people in Irish culture or American culture? And that's where even like a Conor McGregor, like you're talking about, at least it gives some sort of hope, because there's a relationality to him being Irish, and then the martial arts, the masculinity, the bravado. It gives you a sense of directionality in regards to, masculinity of some sort. So, we can go that. By the way, I want to tell everybody, please smash that like. And later, when we start to wind down this conversation, we're going to open it up so anybody can hop in here. We're going to open up the Zoom meeting. We'll probably do that in about maybe 30 more minutes. You guys can hop in if you got something you want to add. So send in your super chats, and then stay tuned. Here in about 30 minutes, we'll open it up for everybody to come in. But I wanted to, again, the basis of today's stream, Raging Against the Dying of the Light, actually comes from a poem by Dylan Thomas, a Welshman. And so I was wanting to just read that. It's real short. Read that, and we can talk about, and then just everything we just said, rally around this concept about raging against the dying of the light. And so it goes,
Let's go for it.
Do not go gentle into the good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see the blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my Father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And so Dylan Thomas wrote this about his father, who was struggling with health problems and that he was nearing death. I think he died actually a few years later. But this metaphor about raging against the dying of the light has become a trope in Western culture. And so for me, the light is Christ, the light is God. And so when we're talking about all the ills that we just described about Western culture, whether it be, continental Europe, the UK, America, Canada, we're seeing the light, I would argue, of God, the Logos itself, being dimmed. Not that it itself is dimming, but that the culture itself is putting the detritus of darkness over it further and further and further. And so this is an impetus for all men. We come from different perspectives. You're more of a Nietzsche and Jungian. I'm an Orthodox Christian. But at least we can come together in the sense that there is a calling for all men to rage against the dying of the light, the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so speak a little bit to the impetus of masculinity in Western society right now, and that there's a calling for all of us.
I think that's a really, really important idea, and especially bickering about various ideological perspectives. Like, it gets you nowhere. Like sitting around and being like, it has to be Nietzsche. It has to be Nietzsche. It's like, what are you going to achieve with that, bro? Like, good on you and all this. And fundamentally, when you study these guys and all this, they come back to these very simple, big ideas. Like, you look at the idea of, what is this world? What does this world have to give? What was Western civilization? You had these men who crafted out of the chaos of the reality heaven on earth in some ways. They had such incredible heights of culture, incredible technological advances, incredible beauty and health. Like, look at the people. There's some of the most beautiful people in the world are Westerners. Incredible moral sophistication. It's just beyond belief. Like, you look back at that, you see all those trad return accounts, and you look back and you're like, man, what is, like, where we live? Of something that was amazing all that time before. And you could very easily say that the world has a logos, the world has a law instantiated by the Lord, instantiated by God, instantiated by the Creator. There's whoever built this thing, he put together an operational system, and if you align with that, you get rewarded with things. This is Platonic idea 101. If you're honest about the way the world works, you have to understand that the truth about the world is good. The laws about the world is good. So align yourself with those laws, and it will be good. And if it is good, it will give you good things, which is life and health and success and joy and fertility and continuance. And then that will be beautiful. The more good you are, the more beautiful you become. There's another one I like to add to that as well, is the idea of strength, because I think this is really realistic. If you go into the gym and you study like a man in the gym, and you think about what's happening, you go into the gym and you realize, I'm not good enough. I'm not working out properly. I'm not eating food properly. I haven't got a good discipline profile. and you go and you do all the right actions. You go and you study it. Like the Lord has put together like a plan. And he says, if you do the right actions in this, something good will happen. So you have to go in honestly, be sincere with yourself. You do the right operations and something good happens. You start to grow, you become bigger, you become stronger. You also become more beautiful. Mm-hmm. And all of these things are related. Strength, health, beauty, life, good. All these things are very, in a simple, elegant, and natural way, are all there. And you see so many people trying to attack this from all different angles. They don't want you to be strong. They don't want you to be good. They want you to be transgressive. They don't want you to tell the truth. They want you to believe everything's relative. They don't want you to be beautiful. They want you to be ugly. They don't want you to believe that God's in control of that stuff. They want you to believe that everything's upside down, or he's fake, or he's not real, or all these type of things. And this is a core that everybody's trying to fight. Like that's ultimately what all dudes are striving towards.
Right.
And when you talk about a civilization of people, like Western man as an abstract concept, our united masculine spirit, like that's ultimately what we're fighting for when it comes down to it. Like we want that for ourselves and to share it among ourselves and to create beautiful projects. Like from the very grounded sense of we'd like to know our little trad wife and trad household, all the way up to the idea of let's build a fucking cathedral or a massive bridge or shoot a rocket into space. These things are all connected to that core, and that phallogocentric core, that spinal cord, that's what that's designed. It evolved over millennia to allow the men of the culture to gather together and move the body towards that goal. That's what it was for. And this is why these people are so dangerous, is because they're attacking that ability for us to pursue the good, which is why everything is starting to degrade so much. Right. And then to the core masculine idea, this is a really hard idea. This is like something that I think is brilliant because you can meditate on it, but it's harsh, is the concept of death and sacrifice. This is like, how does a warrior love Christ? It's such an interesting question. You've got Christ on the cross. He's like, oh, he lost. He didn't achieve anything. He was no fighter and all this. But it's like, well, why would a European knight love him when he charges against a Muslim or something like that? Why would that happen? And it's because Christ...
May I speak to that? I think that's the self-sacrificial nature of a masculine man. And so Christ is representing... God as, not representing, is God as man, historical person, but he doesn't, the idea that God would have to kill a man, that is so below what God would actually do if he was incarnated. And so he's demonstrating what the world does to divinity, what it does to the truth, what it does to a man who's embodying all these phallogocentric values. The world is going to kill you. And it's going to be by the powers that be, the Romans, the Jews at that point. They're the ones that are going to come and they're going to crucify all of us. But that's also then our ticket to the kingdom, because it demonstrates that we are carrying the cross of Christ. And so you talk about that warrior spirit. I've done streams on, especially in Orthodoxy, we have warrior saints. That is not that's not St. George right here. The whole icon, if you guys can see it, is him with a lance stabbing the serpent, stabbing the dragon, stabbing that sort of serpentine evil force that ensnares all of us. And that is, again, a raging against the dying of the light, because sin, evil, it is a darkness. It doesn't have, at least in Orthodox theology, an ontological existence. So evil and good are not battling itself out. Evil is the privation of. Evil is a black hole. It doesn't actually exist. It only exists in its opposition to God, the light. Yes. And so that's the only thing that exists. And getting people to, like you're talking about, the beautiful, look at Western women. Fat, purple hair, facial piercings. They're hideous. Look at it. So we're talking about the trad wife, and thank God, God has blessed me with a beautiful girlfriend I plan on marrying. Nice. So I did get glory to God for that one. But it's so difficult. Look at Western society. I mean, you basically have to go to Eastern Europe. They still have traditional women there, or other parts of the world, because, like you said, strong, vital, healthy, smart, intelligent, and beauty. All these things are being undermined, and it's just so prevalent within all of Western society. It's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. Well, look, I think the party line that you're certain there about, like Christ and the warrior spirit, I think that's such a big deal. It's so hype, like it's such a fiery take that is missed out so much, because that's precisely it. Like, as I was saying, how does a European knight charge against the Muslim? Like, how does he align that with Christ? Well, he's looking at Christ and he's saying, there's a man who put a boundary down. Like, the Muslims are coming in.
Perfect. Yep.
All ultra up Spain. And there comes a point where you say, like, look, I might go and fight these guys and I'm probably going to die. But I have to die for something. I have to die. There has to be somewhere where I say it's over. And you look at Christ, and then you understand. You see what he was. Like, you see this. He shows up, and he's like, man, there's the temple is full of thieves. The religion is not right. It's upside down. There's no the critical theorists are out here telling me what the Mosaic law is and all this stuff. And he basically says, look, I'm just going to stand for it. And if you take my life, like that's it. I don't care. Like, that's the boundary, this is the law. This is the foot down type thing. And that's so powerful, because it really makes you ask the question of, like, well, what would you fight for? Like, what are you standing for? I think this is where the Christianity is just so pregnant with, it's so sophisticated in how it captures all those ideas together in such a beautiful way. And it leads you towards that idea of, like, Christ is the logos. Christ is good. He's beautiful. He's true. And he's also willing to die for that. Right. And that's like, oh my God, that's male spirit in its essence. This is why so many bros, like, they get into Christianity and they start to see Christ in a new way. They rebaptize him from like Christ being the hippie, weed smoking, Burning Man goer.
We talked about that before coming on, because your experience at a Catholic mass of some sort. I don't know if it's one of the more contemporary. I don't know if it was a trad lat mass, but yeah,
it's contemporary.
And it's so disgusting. We're talking about the sort of the cuckold form of Christianity, where Christ is a refugee and he's asexual, so he's sort of like halfway feminine, halfway male, like dangling on the cross. This is not Christianity. That's not what was allowing the martyrs, Saint Ignatius, to actually say, okay, bring on the lions. Go ahead, I'll stand right here. I'm ready to die. And that spirit, that's what converted people in the Roman Colosseum. They come there to watch something gruesome, and they saw a man not back down to anything and allow the lions to ravage him and still profess Christ to the death. And that's what then changes people. That's what they say, oh my God, if he's willing to do that, I want, maybe it is real. And that's how Christianity spread from the onset. Constantine eventually converts the empire, but I've talked about there's only two religions that really spread by conversion, and that was Buddhism and Christianity. Most other religions sort of stay locally within their demographic, their language group, their ethnic group, and then Islam's really the only religion that, by definition, has always been a dominator culture of converting people by the sword. You either convert, you either pay the tax, or you go to war to the battle of the death, and that's the three options you have. And we don't need to get into Islamic theology, but, it's just a different understanding. And so Christ, as that symbol of a man who's willing to die for the truth, because he is the truth, that's what the Western man has lost. I mean, that's the rootlessness, right? Like if we could see Christ as it was presented in the reality of him, men would actually have an orientation in the world. But the Christianity, like I told you, there was an article I saw today. The Church of England they were meeting today to establish a non-gendered God. So they want to stop calling the Godhead, the Trinity, he. So Christ, the Father, the Holy Spirit, they want to do non-gender. And this is cuck world. This is a man who's watching everything he cares about, for lack of a better term, being screwed over. I mean, that's what a cuck is, right? So it's like, that's exactly what these people are doing.
Yeah, it's absolutely true, man. And it's very, like, Jung has this way of framing Christianity, which is so fascinating, where he describes that we have, the unconscious, and we have all these archetypes that we need to hit, and we've got our shadow and all this. But he basically says that we have this sense of deep self, this deep fundamental identity. Like, we understand our human spirit is the way that the modern people, the secular Redditors, say it. Like, what's your human spirit? Oh, it's the love, and it's the believing, what.
Right.
And then he basically says that the identity of Western people, that what sits on that throne of the self, is Christ. Like, right. Jesus Christ is that. He's the literally, like, if you dig into your own imagination and do this great artistic process and pull out all the unconscious content, eventually at the bottom you'll find Jesus, and Jesus will come up. And it's like, this is where Jung's criticism of Nietzsche, for example, comes in, where it's like Nietzsche digs down and pulls up Jesus and pulls up the God tied to him, and Nietzsche tries to overcome that, and Jung's basically like, bro, that's like, first of all, you're not even sure if you're correct. That could just be like rebellion at the ultimate boss. or if you are correct and you're going to do that, you're in for a world of pain, because you're going to have to get destroyed like Christ was. There's no way you can move past something like that without taking on the force of power that went with it. So this is Jung's sort of mystic take. But this is what I find so pernicious about what you see going on with all this stuff. You have these priests come in, and Christ can speak to the male soul to empower men to believe in themselves, to stand for something.
Yes.
Western civilization was healthy for thousands of years with Christianity, you know. It was there. There's no denying that, you know. But then you see them take that symbol and they make him anti-male. They castrate him. They take all those things out of it. And you see this general pattern then where it's like men just can't feel that power. There always has to be something. No matter, you can't have anything. You can't even have Jesus. You can't even have your deepest self. You can't have any of that stuff. It always has to be, there's something wrong with you and you need to be deferring to some type of other minority or identity or something outside of you. And masculinity is wrong. Creative spirit wrong. God and the masculine God wrong. It has to be a gender neutral God. God doesn't believe in assertiveness and creation, in the beautiful and the good, the strength. It doesn't believe in any of that stuff. He's not real. It's not like that. He was compassion. He was these other things.
Right.
It's always an attempt to subvert that and stew it away. And I think this is a really big problem. It's a really, really big problem. And it's just so parasitic,
right.
You know, it's so demoralizing.
Continuing this line of thought, you know, again, using that metaphor that men are the castle walls and women and children are the jewels inside the castle, with the walls are necessary to protect. You look at what I call the Jezebel spirit. And so you look at the Western woman who is incredibly sexually promiscuous and has multiple partners. Now, again, moving back into a traditional Christian world, the men are strong. And because the men are strong, therefore, the women then have to maintain their boundaries because they want a strong man. I think women naturally want a strong man, but now we see, again, the dissolution of boundaries, as we talked about. The women are trying to become more masculine. They want careers. They want to compete with men, but then they really don't want to compete with men because, well, and the Jezebel spirit, you look at the Bible, and Jezebel was the wife of King Ahab, and King Ahab was a cucked dude. So Jezebel got Israel to worship Baal and go back to child sacrifice. So you look at abortion in the Western world. This is child sacrifice. And the same thing is true. So because Ahab wasn't able to stand up on his principles, he wasn't connected to God, he wasn't able to do what was right and have that logo-centered mentality and be able to be self-sacrificial. Well, his wife, who was, according to all intents and purposes, beautiful and whatnot, well, she led him. She controlled him. And so he willingly, as the king of Israel, brought back in Baal worship, the subversion, the turning away. And that is a simp. Again, according to Christian scripture, I always argue Adam was the first simp because creation didn't fall when Eve ate the apple. Creation fell when Adam ate the apple, because men have to have their eyes on something transcendent. And by doing that, things naturally fall into place. And then women naturally will follow those men. But because the men aren't looking at something transcendent, they're looking at titties and ass and like girls on OnlyFans. Well, now you're being led. You're like Adam doing what Eve tells you to do. You're like Ahab doing exactly what Jezebel tells you to do. And so now we have all these women who are Jezebels, and you can't build families that way. And a nation is only as strong as the family is. And so now we don't have strong families.
You know, I really like this line of thought because it's quite a shocking one to everyone trying to spin together an ideology. Masculinity is the first principle. The male is the first principle. The male spirit is the first principle. You imagine God as a man. Why is God a man? Why is he male? Well, of course, he's the patrilineal creator. Like, he's the first male, the first establishing force. And all of us men have a little bit of his creative force inside of us. And we're special. We're unique. Like, this is, you know, people hear this stuff and you start to realize that this is one of the cardinal sins to start to speak this way, that men are the generators, men are the creators, men are the asserters, men are the boundary setters, men are the spiritual spinal cord that put together everything. When men are in order, women quite quickly fall into shape, fall into order. And that's the thing we're talking about, beautiful, good and true. It's like the men are strong, the world around them becomes more beautiful. And then the European woman can become incredibly beautiful. She's like naturally just so gorgeous. But without that assertive force, she degenerates and she becomes ugly. And then she doesn't like herself. Right. And she looks in the mirror and she's like, I'm fat and ugly. I feel bad about myself. And she has all these rebellious things like, fat shaming and stuff like this. And she's in pain. She's suffering because the masculine force has lost its spirit. And of course, the whole demoralization project is to try to demoralize that fundamental masculine spirit, male first energy. It's very interesting. And you notice that that's a cardinal sin across the board.
Yep.
You can't go into anything. You go to Reddit and you start saying this shit. Doesn't matter if you're Christian or if you're Jungian or whatever, you'll just get bullets. Bullets will be sent to you. They'll send you car bombs. Like they will not, they hate that stuff because it's like men have to be evil. Men have to be bad. Men have to be stupid. They all have to be Homer Simpsons who need to be pushed out of decision making and replaced by something else.
Because the state becomes the man. The state becomes the man, and that's when the women get their, they like, the meme that goes around is like a woman telling her husband, he says, make me a sandwich. She says, no, I'm going to work. And then she goes to Subway and she says, well, what do you want on your sandwich? To like some guy like coming in, it's like.
But this is it. And this is a really, really powerful point because I guess sometimes like in our spheres, more reactionary spheres, we get a lot of dudes who are very jaded with girls, which I understand.
Right.
But women's nature is as subverted as men's nature is. Right. Like women's natural urges are so monstrously transformed to turn them into these sterilized baby men making Subway sandwiches for a CEO instead of like her husband and her children or something like this. Right. You know the phenomenon. I'm 40 years old. I unfroze my eggs and they don't work. I'm now sterile and I write for BuzzFeed. And you're like, this is this is such a disaster because what you actually see is that the myth that was sold to her is anti-life. It's anti her own life. Like this is maybe I would call this the most positive frame you could look at Nietzsche. Nietzsche's positive assertive worldview he is constantly saying this idea of like pro-life or anti-life, life denying perspectives and life affirming perspectives. And you start to see this very, very quickly that our modern world has this huge conglomerate of perspectives that are about destroying life, destroying the beautiful, the true, and the good. So, we promote things like abortion. We promote things like sodomy. Now, we promote things like usury. We promote all sorts of things in our modern world. We have the gender roles confused. The food is poisonous. We have all sorts of ideas that lead to sterility, that lead to infertility, that lead to euthanasia in Canada, death, that lead to poisoning, that lead to lowering of health, to lead to inability for us to organize as genders, to organize as communities. Yep. We have that fundamental demoralized idea that we Western people, we men are evil, we Western people are evil, which leads to lack of self-confidence, which is the opposite of what life wants. Life wants you to believe in yourself.
Right.
We're uncreative, infertile. And you'll notice that there's this huge life-denying energy, and it infects Christianity. But then there's strong Christians who don't allow that to infect them. They promote pro-life, aggressive, beautiful, good. They're standing for the logos, and you see this is this amazing energy that is what leads to life is there, and if you go away from that, like you're describing the privatio bon or whatever it's called, if you drift away from that light, you become anti-life. You become a rebellion against that. You're basically just dying. That's all you are. And you're trying to pull as much of the people who are in the light as possible with you. But that's your only goal. It's like a cancer. It doesn't know what it's doing. Right. It's just absorbing resources. And then once it kills the body, it dies as well. And it's like, oh, fuck, that was a mistake. Well, there you go. So what?
And we would, as Christians, we'd say that is what the evil one is trying to do. And that is what it's doing inside people. So people believe lies. And this is where, you look at the pandemic, and we would argue a spiritual lens on that phenomenon is the more lies that you internalize and believe, truth itself can only take up so much space within you. So literally the surface area within one's own body is it's losing the ability for truth to be there. So it's just darkness, more and more lies. Wow. And so they're going to self-sabotage. They're going to kill themselves, and they're going to climb on to this demonic system that is moving towards this one world antichrist system where it's all anti-human. And so you look at climate change and all this stuff. And there was a guy on Twitter that I shared that he's like, oh, this is what humans have done to nature, and this is what would it look like if humans didn't exist, and it's like a pristine nature. And it's like, this isn't morality. This is, again, this anti-human spirit that all life would be so much better if we all didn't exist. And it's stemming from the fact that you inside yourself actually hate yourself because you've adopted so many lies, because you're engrossed in so many different sins, and therefore you are wanting to destroy the whole system because you really just want to destroy yourself.
And do you know what's so interesting about Christ? Again, this kind of comes from my understanding with Jung and working with people, but these people hate themselves. This is very true. And they're very sick. And I don't mean that as like they're sick and I hate them. It's like they're actually genuinely in a state of suffering, in a state of pain. And they have this internal disgust. It's like, I'm a white person and we're just so, we don't salt our foods. We don't do seasoning. I'm so pathetic. I'm so disgusting. And there's this, it distorts into these massive projects of it's spreading the darkness, as you would say. You know, it's these huge projects of anti-health. You're promoting all this sterility, all this death. And then what's so fascinating with Christ is that Christ's idea is that you can literally hate me. Like, you can come up, I'll give you a baseball bat and you can break my legs and you can beat me and all this, but I will still love you. I'll still accept you no matter what. You can hate me as much as you want, but I'll still accept you. The unconditional love inside of it, the one that they subvert so much.
Right.
But the true meaning of that is that, like, Christ is, I am life. Through me, you get life. And it's like, you can hate yourself as much as you want, but I still love you. This is why you should believe in life. And then when you believe in Christ in this way, he actually gives you back your life. You can stop hating yourself.
Oh, that's perfect, brother.
Stop being anti-life and actually go forward with that and actually carry that energy forward. And I see that so much that all these people, it's like, man, they look like lost Christians, you know? Right. They look like they're at war with the world.
And that's where I want to connect this raging against the dying of the light with the redemptive arc of Christ. And so all of us Western men, we've all succumbed to it. I remember I was exposed to pornography at the age of 10. I think, like watching hardcore pornography. And so it's like our cultures have been so subverted that all of us have been that person that has fallen away. But again, like you said, Christ still loves us. And so there's still the opportunity for salvation. The first person in the kingdom was the thief to the right of Christ. Who knows the atrocities he did? You know, my patron saint is St. Patrick of Ireland. He was a murderer. Right. And so, but
hey, don't be saying that, right?
Well, that's what I love about him is that the way that he then found Christ, you know, telling him that the boat's ready for him, you know, and he literally flees one night and goes all the way across country, and the boat is there that the angel told him would be there. And then, you know, it sets this whole arc that all he wanted to do was go home. But once he got home, he said, you know what, I'm going back to the place that I was enslaved in because I'm going to kill the snakes, the serpents, St. George, the warrior spirit. It's the same thing. And that, you know, right now, whether you're, again, just like St. Patrick, my patron saint, you can hop on board now. You can begin to rage against the dying of the light. And this now gives your life purpose. This gives your life an orientation. It gives you the opportunity as a man to embody the good, the true, and the beautiful and stamp out all these serpents.
Man, I think that's a big idea, because when you're dealing with these people, maybe even people on the fence, but it's such an interesting frame, because how are they trying to frame you? Like they saying you're a degenerate, masculine chauvinist, or you're an ignorant Christian trying to bash me with a Bible or something like that. And it's like, listen, put all that aside. You're suffering. You're in pain. You're unhealthy. And there's a reason for this, because of the way you see the world. You're anti-life. But let's put all that aside and just talk about the facts. You're suffering. You're doing surgeries on yourself and confusing yourself. You're taking these hormones that are screwing you up. You're aborting your own children. You're sterilizing your best years. You're not creating art. You're not creating beauty. You're doing all this. You're traumatizing yourself. You're participating in these things that are hurting other people. And it's like, you don't have to do that, you know? You don't have to be at a constant rebel. You don't have to one-up us. You don't have to be like, we don't want you, you know, you can just live happy. You can actually overcome that suffering. You can go and you can just accept. This is what Jesus is so powerful. It's like, he's just saying, I love you, just accept it. That's all I want. I don't want anything else from you. I just want you to say, he's trying to say, look, I'll give you a hug if you want, but you don't have to take it, but it's just there. And it's so interesting that it's like, that's sort of saying, you can just stop hating life and you can just start enjoying life and participating in life and promoting life and aligning with life and aligning with the beautiful, the good and the true, the logos. And that becomes generative and it's abundant and it gives everybody wins as a consequence of this. And it's just so elegant and simple and so psychologically difficult for people, because that comes with that constriction of saying, I've decided that this is the way the world works. It's Marxist, right. And then you're stuck within the confines of that worldview. And then you've got such a challenge on top of yourself.
And that's why they can't love, right? You look at the inversion. And so these people that love social justice and all this stuff, they're actually the most unloving people, that you have to totally buy into their worldview, and then they'll love you, right? The whole cancel culture, that's what this is. This is not forgiveness. This is the lack of, in the name of being open-minded and inclusive. Well, you're extremely exclusive for those who don't buy into your ideology. And so these people they're angry. They're angry with themselves. They're angry with the world. And it's this internal disposition, because they're against the structure of reality. They're in opposition to logos itself, and the way they live, the way they think, the way they move, the way they dress, the way they interact with people. It's like, dude, you've brought it onto yourself. And this is how the West, and this gets back into, we were talking privately about Oswald Spengler, but that Faustian spirit, right? So Faust is, he makes that deal with the devil, but it's ultimately self-destructive. And that's so I think it's so impeccable how Oswald Spengler, characterized the Apollonian cultures and the Faustian culture, and that Western civilization is a Faustian culture that has basically bought into this idea of progress through technology and this sort of magical association and alliance with the devil, if you will. But it's like we've totally undermined ourselves in this hope for like eternal progress, where we're totally leaving this phallogocentric, this central nervous system, the spinal cord that gives us life. That, again, it's like the deal that we made with the devil years ago, centuries ago. It's coming back to fruition, and that we're just living in that's why people love The Walking Dead. We're living in cultures filled with zombies. They're literally killing themselves all around us.
Yes, it's surreal. I think, and this is always a very fascinating way of looking at it, because you're taking, like us Westerners, there's definitely these agents that are launching themselves upon our spinal cord and demoralizing us and leading to the qualitative experience of young men to be very, very bad, especially if you're Western, because everything about us is subverted. Like, you're not allowed to be a man at all. This is why the likes of Tate, like, I know a lot of people get mad at Tate, but like, why did he do so well? That's a better question to ask. Well, it's because he went up and he just basically asserted male reality. And that's just the biggest taboo of all in some ways. And maybe not the biggest, but it's a pretty big taboo. And then
it's definitely up there. Could be the biggest.
And this is what's fascinating. And then that's kind of where the conversation is at. But then I guess you could also say it's like, maybe in a more sophisticated way, it's like, how much is this a consequence of the West itself? Like, Christianity, for example, was, towards the end of it, it was very heavily for the women. The church was really just where all the women would go. It had a low attendance of men, and all the men were running off the science and whatnot. And like the likes of, that was sort of like the libertine men. They weren't liberals, but they would have believed in God, but he would have been an awful lot more of a, like, they'd all be going to these occult fraternities and stuff like this. And this is these types of characters. And that's the energy that was going forward. And they were following that Faustian spirit. And it's sort of like, all right, look where it's gotten us.
Right.
All right, maybe our next question is, where do we go from there?
Well, talking about Andrew Tate, and I did a whole stream before it blew up, but I saw that it was getting ready to, and so I have my own, obviously, criticisms, his conversion to Islam, some of the ways in which he lives his life. But aside from that, getting back to the question that you're highlighting, why was he so popular in the first place, is that, he highlighted that men have to make ourselves. Women are born with an innate value because they're women and they are procreative and they can have children as long as they don't sterilize themselves, which the world's trying to get them to do. But men, we're not built with innate value, other than most likely most of us would have died in war. We have to make ourselves. We have to build ourselves. We have to learn. We have to develop skills. We have to develop talents. And that is part of this masculine process. And, even within Christianity, this is a pill that more Christians need to swallow. That, we've talked, privately, that you've had some bad experiences with ortho bros and Twitter. And it's like, some of these dudes are pretty feminine, and it's like they're catty, and they're not, they're not embodying a sort of male spirit, a more traditional spirit. And our tradition itself offers us this. And it means that we have to work on ourselves. We work on ourselves to be more like Christ, but we have to work on ourselves to build skills, to make money, to have a business. Everybody wants these trad waifu, the trad virgin girl. And it's like, bro, you're overweight. You don't do anything. Like, it's great. God bless you for doing your prayers. That's excellent. But you got to make yourself as a man. There's more to this than just sitting here and then judging and criticizing everybody. Oh, you're too worldly, or you're too vain, or you're too into masculinity. It's like, bro, it's you, man. Like, you got to work on yourself, and you got to make yourself, and then God can give you that woman that will match who you are and your purpose. And so I think for a lot of the Christian men is the men have to figure out what their purpose is. Like, I believe God gives us purposes, and it may be to own your own plumbing business. It may be to work, in corporate. I don't know what it is, but that's between you and God. That's something that you have to work on and develop. And that's a journey. That's a journey of going from this thing to that thing and gaining this skill and that skill. And, I don't really like this, but I like this, and moving through life. And, you just look at so many young men, even within the Christian sphere, even within all these other places, they haven't done that. And that's what we need. We need men to begin to develop themselves. And I think that's where Andrew Tate again, I don't agree with the whole presentation, but talking about his money and his lifestyle, like, that's really what he's trying to get at, is that the man has to make himself. And, him saying, oh, look how I made myself, webcam services, again, aside from all that stuff, but it's true. Like, men, we got to make ourselves, and that's part of our Christian journey as well. And that's how we maintain society.
Yeah. And it's so true. And that's like a great articulation of it, because like, when it comes down to it, it's almost everything we want to do is a bit of an escapism. Like, I'd love to run away into Nietzsche's works, but that's not actually going to make me anything I'm going to be impressed with. It'll just make me a fucking dork.
Right.
And you see someone like Tate, and what exactly does he promote? It's like just this brutal relentlessness. And maybe, it's wrapped up with sins, but there's that core energy that is just so resonant and so lacking. He's a man going up there and putting the foot down. And that's just very, very strong. It's a very, very strong energy. Now, I'd actually love to ask you what you think about the Islam thing, because his conversion to Islam, I understand it. And this is a little bit scary, but I see I've met like a lot of MMA fighters, ex-veterans, and I chat with them, and they'd be like, yeah, I'm a Muslim. And they'd be like, white Scottish guy, blue eyes. And I'm kind of like, you're a Muslim, bro? Like, what's going on there? And he's like, well, they wouldn't be able to explain it. They wouldn't explain it intellectually. They wouldn't talk about the theology and all this type of stuff. I don't think Islam is too heavy on the theology either. Like, I think it is very much. And this is the thing, is that they would say that Islam has this core vital energy, this masculine energy. It really asserts masculine instincts. You can understand that we all have our instincts. We have our biochemistry of testosterone, if you will. And Islam just like speaks to that very, very directly. And I would ask these guys, and these guys would say they'd look at Christianity, and these guys would judge it very much in how they see it.
Right.
They'd look at Christ, and they'd find a little bit of that warrior energy in Christ, but it would be wrapped up with all the feelings of like it's not strong enough, it's too effeminate and stuff like this. And then more specifically, they would look at the priests, and they'd be like, the state of the church is completely falling apart. And so they'd move over to Islam. They'd say Islam just feels strong, it's assertive, the stories are simple. It's like warrior Muhammad goes, conquers, enforces Islam. It's just like straightforward, brutal in that type of way. And I see that to the point now that I'm sort of like, all right, that's like a dozen MMA fighters, veterans, hyper masculine dudes that have moved over to that. And that's starting to turn into a trend. You know what I mean? Like, I'm observing a trend at that point. And Europe, I think this is a much bigger question for Europe than the Americas, but Europe has a lot of Muslims now at this point. And in the inner cities, like the rap is all Muslim and stuff like this. And so it's like, is Islam going to start to become a competitor for the male youth? Like, are these guys going to start leaving? Are we going to see white ex-Christian men leaving towards Islam and stuff like that?
Yeah. Well, I was going to do a stream on this for my members on my website, but it's exactly what I want to talk about, is why Islam, I think, is a threat to the West, not in the way that Islam actually expanded. So, 620, we have Muhammad. He dies around 630. The 630s, 40s, 50s, Islam is on a conquest, where the Arab tribes have been united in Saudi Arabia, and they were incredible horseback warriors. And they took down the Persian Empire, and they gave it to the Eastern Roman, my Byzantine Empire, my Orthodox Christian Empire. They gave it to them. And when I look at Islam as a threat now, it's not that they're a military threat. I mean, I don't know if you guys have met a lot of Saudis, I'm not worried about that aspect of Islam, but because of the culture, it does offer this out for these Western men who feel disenfranchised because, I want my trad virgin waifu. Well, I can go become Muslim and maybe I can actually marry a virgin, or maybe I can at least marry a woman that will submit to me due to the religion. And so I look at Islam being a threat, not because it's true, because if you actually start, again, with a philosophical mind, you start getting into the theology, like, well, what? Like, what? This is ridiculous. But that's not what the appeal is. And that's really not why, like you said, they're not going to be able to articulate at an intellectual, philosophical, presuppositional level why Islam's correct. It's that, wow, it offers me structure. It offers me a society where I can get my woman and she can be traditional. It offers me the opportunity to be in a community that is in opposition to the LGBTQ. Now, when it comes to globalism, we've already seen, like, the Catholic Church, I don't know if you were aware with Chrislam, that the Pope has already made an alliance with basically the majority of imams around the world. And so I think it's in Abu Dhabi. They're building these religious centers that's the blending of Catholicism and Islam. And so Islam itself is by nature a globalist ideology, because they believe that, they got to convert the whole world to Islam. And then when Jesus comes back, which they do believe, he's going to then persecute all these non-believers who aren't Muslim. But Islam, to me, is just the right hand of the left hand of globalism. So the left hand is this progressive nonsense that we've been talking about. And I see Islam as going to be this sort of false dialectic that Western men are going to flood to, because it offers them this opportunity to have these traditional structures, but it's not like it's true. It's not. I've never seen a Muslim win a debate against, especially an Orthodox Christian. And this is where I'd point out to Jay Dyer, Sam Shamoon, Orthodox Shahada. They've done great work on all this stuff. And like, Islam isn't an intellectual thing. Islam is the epitome of Arab culture. And it's the first thing that unified all these Arab tribes that have always been at war with each other. And that's why you look at Sunni and Shia Islam. The Shia Islam is the Persian form. The Persians got conquered by the Arabs, and so they were forced to convert to Islam. And of course, they don't want to bow down to Arab culture, so they have a different interpretation of Islam, which is Shia, which is a Persian Iranian form of Islam. And so, you look at Islam, there's only two real groups that voluntarily converted, the Mongols and the Turks, and both of them were horseback warrior cultures, and Islam was a great utility in regards to a religious structure that would allow them to conquer other peoples. And so I look at Islam as another sort of ideology in regards to this globalist structure. And I see Andrew Tate, converting to Islam. One, I think it's part and parcel of this globalist phenomenon of not looking deeper and deeper into the real intricacies of worldviews and paradigms and what is truth. But it's really a utility for him, because, the banking system started to deplatform him in the Western world. Where are you going to bank at? Well, I can go over to, Dubai. I can go over to whatever Muslim country, and they have their own banks there. So I can put my money there. I can become Muslim, and at least I'll have a group of people that will defend me against this other, like, progressive leftist form. But for me, I look at them as almost two hands of the same entity. And I think that Islam is going to be a real threat, not because of the actual violence or terrorists or anything. It's a threat because it's going to allow men out and find that sort of traditionalism that they're looking for. But what it is, it's a submission to Arab culture. It's a submission to, again, doing away all this stuff you're talking about, Western identity, European identity. To become Muslim is to give all that away. All your ancestors have been fighting against this for generations. And you're going to give it all away for what? Because you're not man enough to build yourself up to actually find a woman that will submit to you as a Christian bride. That it's just easier to become Muslim. And I think it's just going to become a real phenomenon. I think more and more Western men are going to become.
Wow, I mean, that's a great take. That's very, very interesting, because I completely understand it. Like, Islam they just have their instincts more aligned right now. They just stand for, they're sensible, they're in that place where they're not going to demoralize masculinity, and they don't really do that. And so the offer is just very strong at the moment. And so you have someone like Tate, and Tate's a very pragmatic dude, and he's just sort of saying, look, he's sort of correct, did Orthodox Romania stand up for him when push came to shove? It seems like he probably feels abandoned by them now, and he's sort of like, I'm glad he's walking around with his Quran, you know. And I don't think the Romanians would like that at all, because that's like very offensive to the Orthodox Church and whatnot. And so he's sort of like, all right, Islam is going to protect me, it's going to reward my male spirits, it's not going to shame me the whole time. Obviously, there's geopolitical things in it as well, so there's very, very pragmatic. And so as I said, I've seen that phenomenon, and I guess you've seen it too then. And it looks like that makes sense. Like, as a dude sits down and tries to think in his head, he's not going to be wondering about abstractions. He's going to be saying to himself, all right, how do I get what I need in order to fulfill my needs? And that would be like order, resistance to these type of things, and, you know, a wife and stuff like this. So yeah, man, that's crazy. That's very interesting. That'll be an interesting thing to observe. I've said loads of times before that I'm such a big proponent of Nietzsche, because I think Nietzsche has a very strong, vital male energy that is almost
and vitalism
like
was essential to his world. That's why he was in opposition to Darwinian evolution, because he believed it was a vitalistic approach, that it was really about the creativity of life. It's not about the survival of the fittest, about domination and submission to the same degree. So he had a different understanding of evolution, if you will.
And he speaks to that instinct, I think, very, very well. You know, I don't think he's, you know, I don't expect everyone to go reading Nietzsche, but he's talking about that male reality in a very strong way. And we in the West, like, we need to try get that energy back, because it's like we're losing now some of our most masculine men, and that becomes a reinforcing prophecy then, doesn't it? Because we become more effeminate as things go forward.
Yeah.
So it's dodgy.
No,
but if you want to,
it's an absolute fact. I just shared the link in the live chat. So, guys, if anybody wants to hop in here and you got some questions or comments you'd like to ask Uberboyo or myself, you can do so right there. I just shared the link in the live chat. All you got to do is click that link. We're in a Zoom meeting, so I think you can join as a guest if you don't have Zoom. I think if you're on a phone, you will need probably the Zoom app. But if you're on a desktop or a computer, you should just be able to click that link right there in the live chat, and you can hop on and you can ask us some questions. We have a few super chats, actually. You know, one is from Mark. He throws in $7.99. He says, could you speak about the situation in Scotland? I'm thinking about moving my family to northern Scotland, Aberdeen, to get out of Australia. Do you know anything about Scotland right now? What's your take on that?
It was Mark, was it? Mark.
Yeah, his name was Mark. Yep.
Okay, my man, Scotland is not a good place to go. Like, almost all Nordic countries, I would consider Ireland and Scotland Nordic to an extent. We're very instantiated with a lot of this. Like, Ireland's got an awful lot of very, very strong, let's say, modern instincts. Canada is perfect litmus test for this. Look at Canada. Canada is just a clown world. Like, it's unbelievable. It's like a circus. It's just hilarious to look at it. It's completely everything. If you were just going to create a perfect movie of just the parody of the modern age of the zeitgeist, Canada would be it. Scotland's very close to that as well, man. Like, Scotland are not in a great state in terms of their instincts at all. I just described to you, there was the guy who converted to Muslim. One of them was Scottish, you know. So yeah, Scotland's, I don't know. I have no personal experience with it, though, and I wouldn't like to slander Scotland. I actually really, really like people. But from what I understand, they're very, very liberal, and you got to be wary about that. So the simplest thing you do, man, is go test it. You know, go up there, check it out, see what's going on. But I'd assume a little bit pessimistic on that one.
Yeah.
Like, sadly, I think Eastern Europe, Mediterranean Europe, or like a lot of people are going to the Islamic world, these are your only options if you're trying to weather a very serious storm. I think they're your best bets, you know?
Right.
And then there's also the question about in your own country. Like, Australia is fucking crazy, of course, but there's parts of it, maybe the outback, but there's parts of it where you're going to be fine. You know, in America, Texas was as free as any place in Eastern Europe. You know, Louisiana was as good as that. There's parts of South America. So I think you should should try to kind of check out and say to yourself, what's the best options? Don't think in terms of countries, think in terms of sort of locations, and see what you can spin.
Yeah, that's good advice. We got a gentleman in here, but his audio is not connected. Mr. Gottlieb. Brother, turn your audio on, and if you can't turn your camera on, your audio is not connected, so you probably can't hear us, and we cannot hear you. Again, guys, the link right there in the live chat. Click it. Hop on in. If you got questions, you got beef, you think I said something, I'm totally off base here. Your opportunity. You can correct me. You can correct Uberboyo, if you will. And we can just have a calm going back and forth. Here we go. It looks like Mr. Gottlieb is there. We go. He's connected his audio. Hey, brother. Amadeus, what's going on, man?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hi, David Patrick. Hi, Uberboyo. It's nice to see you on the stream again.
Thank you very much, brother. Amadeus Gottlieb is a great name, by the way.
It is. That's a real nice name.
It's not my real name. But it's nice to see you guys being a little bit less combative than perhaps the last time you guys had a stream. It seems as though Uberboyo has perhaps a more nuanced understanding of Christianity this time around, or perhaps I don't know. Would you say that's the case?
Well, it always evolves, it grows, it always evolves. So it's always good for me to learn as I go forward. But last time, me and Dave sat down, we said, right, let's go head to head and try to, first principle, say what we're going to say, and I'll go stand for Nietzsche, you stand for Christianity. So
yeah, it really wasn't even tenuous, but like me and him, we were cool during and after. So we went back and forth, but it was never
sparring.
Yeah, it was never
sparring.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think my own
I definitely have. I was just going to say, I always noticed that my understanding of these things evolve and they become like clearer and simpler and more sophisticated. So I think that was about a year ago. Like definitely, I'd say it's gotten better since then.
I would say that's also true for me. I've been on a journey myself and also interested in Orthodox Christianity. But I have an issue, I think, and this is what I wanted to ask my question about, probably more directed towards David. But I find it difficult to accept the divinity of Christ, even though I do recognize many of the really positive and useful aspects of the theology. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it is just my own pride and if that's related to a kind of anti-Semitism, just to be frank, but I find it difficult to accept that a particular man is actually God, even though I understand that the concept of Christ kind of necessitates this incarnation idea. I find it almost easier to accept Christ as an abstract concept rather than a particular person. Not sure if that makes sense, but I wonder if you could speak to that and if you had anything similar in your journey.
No, this is a common, brother. And so I would actually begin in the opposite. So instead of beginning with a man, then God, I assume that you believe in God.
Yes.
Okay.
In a deist sort of way.
Sort of way. So when you say deist, are you meaning a sort of God that's a clockworker? So he kind of created creation and kind of put it into place, and it's just kind of unfolding from that point forward?
Yeah, something like a neutral entity that doesn't particularly care about individual lives of people, but is the lawgiver.
Okay.
I suppose you could call God good in this sense as well. In my mind, God cannot be described as good because good is, I don't know, it feels like a word that's too human somehow.
Well, from an Orthodox Christian worldview, we would say that good necessitates a transcendent entity and it's an uncreated energy. So when we're talking about where does love come from, what is goodness, what is truth, what is beauty, what is logic and reason and mercy and compassion, honor and glory, you can't touch any of these things. And so in our worldview, these pre-exist creation itself because creation is good, and therefore for creation to be good, goodness would necessitate a pre-existent it'd have to pre-exist the thing which was created. And so that's why we say it's natural to the essence of who the Godhead is. And so we then, as Orthodox Christians, our job is to participate in these uncreated energies. It's a little bit different than Western Christianity because we have a doctrine of theosis. So we believe the reason why Christ, the second person, the Logos, had to become a man within space and time is so that we can then cross that barrier into eternity itself. So if God never became man, how exactly do you directly participate with the Godhead? That's a question. Now, I'm not saying that you have to come with an answer on that. This stuff you have to work through. This is your personal journey. But how do you engage with God? And so, for example, people who believe that God is pure simplicity and that God is, so if I say, okay, is your God unity? Is he pure oneness? And you say, yeah, God's oneness. Okay, then can your God be multiple? And you say, no, because he's oneness. And I say, well, then oneness is a bigger box than your God. Because my God is both one and many. My God is eternal, but also entered into the creation that he created. There's nothing you can say about the Trinitarian Godhead in the Christian worldview that he can't do. He's done all of it. So by definition, if you're going to put up these standards on what God would be by the category itself, it's only the Trinitarian God that really makes sense. And so then when it comes to the divinity of Christ, for us, the whole point is for us to then participate in divinity. How do we participate in divinity? We do it through these energies by embodying them. So we believe that we're made in the image of God. And so you and me and Uberboyo, we're having a highfalutin conversation right now that's logical, it's rational, and it's participating in all these things that animals don't participate in. But where do those things come from? We would say it's because we're made in the image of the Godhead. And so because we're made in the image, we get to participate in things that only the Godhead participates in. And that's what all these energies are. And so if Christ never became a man in history, it's like the problem with, Jordan Peterson when he was talking with Jonathan Pageau is like, he broke down in tears because if all this stuff is real, the archetypes, the symbolism, the metaphors, it's only fully real if it literally happened too. So we can talk about parables and archetypes and narratives and stories and the Jezebel spirit and all this different stuff, but if all this are the archetypes, if the logos itself wasn't actually made flesh, there isn't a sort of material reality to any of this stuff. It's just like up here. And that's why we say that Christ's divinity becoming man is essential for how then the image of man gets to participate in the full reality of the Godhead itself. And no rational argument is going to give you a point where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, now I definitely believe in the divinity of Christ. This is something that is tied again as Orthodox to your nous. So if you begin to pray, maybe you began to ask God to reveal himself, soften your heart, things like this. This allows humility. And if it is pride that's potentially blocking a realization of why this might be the case, pray one night. Just, you don't have to believe anything I'm saying, but just try it one night. Pray to the Trinity, the Holy Trinity, and just ask him, hey, I'm struggling with this. I don't know about this. Can you help me? Soften my heart, give me eyes to see. And I think you'll be blown away by what happens, what Jung would call synchronicities, we would call providence, what begins to happen from that point forward.
Amadeus, do you want to actually respond to that? Because I'd love to ask you a couple of questions. But
yeah. I suppose this is beyond rational, right? It reminds me of what you were saying, Uberboyo, about Islam not being rational. I suppose at the end of the day, one just makes a decision, and he goes with a particular philosophy, a particular religion. It's not a intellectual type of process. So I appreciate what you said, David.
Yeah, well, I think that if you got into this, is where I would point you towards like the work of Jay Dyer and some of the Orthodox apologists. If you want to get into the intellectual and you want to start looking at paradigms, a deistic paradigm has some real problems. Just using logic. So if you want to take the logic and rationality to the extent that it can go, you can do that. That's what a Christian apologetics is. So I would recommend then get into Christian apologetics, see how we deconstruct other worldviews, and then you can come to a conclusion that maybe you'll disagree with us. That's fine. I'm not here to beat you with the Bible or convert you. Obviously, I think it's a personal journey. And if you really want to know the truth, then maybe you would look into some of these apologetic arguments and look at, okay, what is the Orthodox critique of deism? What is the Orthodox critique of this philosophical system or this theology? Because we would argue, and I would argue as a religious studies scholar who came to Orthodoxy, it wasn't that I just spun a wheel and like put my finger down and said, okay, I'll choose this one. No, I chose it because I kicked the tires. I want to test it. I was into psychedelics, New Age, Gnosticism, all this stuff. So I had to challenge it. And that's a process. We're not Protestants. We don't believe that, you can wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden everything I just said, you're going to believe wholeheartedly and you're saved for the rest of your life. It's a process. It's a journey. And that's where then you begin to move in this, again, walk this journey, walk with Christ, as we would say. And there is logic behind all this stuff. But ultimately, when it comes to divinity, if logic is an energy that's natural to the essence of God, God then is outside the box of logic by necessity, by definition. And so logic can only take you so far through human understanding. God cannot stand inside of a box called logic and then be fully comprehended. That would mean he's not God.
Right.
So, but it's a great question, brother. And Uberboyo, go ahead, man.
Amadeus, do you want to say anything in response? I don't want to jut in and interrupt.
No, go ahead.
So I'm not sure if I understood this properly. Were you suggesting that a part of your struggle with accepting Christ as the one guy is because he was Jewish? And maybe we shouldn't be too blunt about that. I know it's like YouTube and all this, but we're not saying anything stupid and hateful and all this type of stuff. We're actually having a proper serious conversation. So, like, is that a part of it?
It is a part of it in the sense that it feels like something that is not of Europe, right? And
well, it'd be like accepting Muhammad. It's like how it'd feel really weird because he's an Arab. He's not European, and it's like, why can't I accept, I don't know, like Joe from the back arse of Ireland or something like this? Why not him? So yeah, I understand.
I mean, as I say, it almost sounds like a cope to my own self, because obviously, like, in the historical context that we find ourselves in, obviously Europe has been Christian for a very, very long time. So it's obviously closer to our tradition as Europeans.
What is the tradition of Europeans?
Christianity, right, at this point, I would say.
So when we talk about Christianity, though, it's in the Gospel of John, it's the synthesis of the Greek philosophical tradition with the prophetic tradition of the Hebrews. And so I would argue, again, regarding the ethnicity of the Old Testament people, is if God was God and let's say his creation fell and he's trying to reveal himself to people, he would have to choose a single group, whether it be Chinese or people from Zimbabwe or whatever it is. Let's just theoretically say he chose a group and they were Hebrews, and this comes from the seed of Abraham, and that then he has a prophetic tradition of revealing himself to certain prophets to lead these people astray who kept doing the wrong thing, sacrificing their children, worshiping other gods, and that he would reveal how he's going to manifest within space and time. And he could only reveal that message not by appealing to one people, and say, okay, I'm God, here I am, and I'm going to come at this point. It would be through a historical process of books written by multiple people, all revealing a same story. Christ is the ending of that tradition. And so we as Orthodox Christians are Israel. And so when you then have a problem with any ethnic group, and I don't want to say certain words too much here, so I think you would probably understand why. So if there's a particular ethnic group that you have a problem with, well, their religion is newer than Christianity, especially Orthodox Christianity being the continuation of the Old Testament tradition into the New Testament. I'm sure you're familiar with things like the Talmud and stuff like that. Those are more recent texts than even the New Testament scriptures, the epistles and the gospels. And the problem then with a group that has rejected the order of God, if God is the Logos, if, as John's saying, in arche in ho Logos, if there was a Logos and it revealed himself to people, and the way he revealed himself was through a prophetic tradition by a chosen people, but then also the Greeks had developed the metaphysical, the abstract understanding of what that is, the Logos, and it comes together in the Gospel of John, and it dissolves the boundary between Jew and Gentile. And then there's a people who are defined by the rejection of that Logos. Those people may then have a problem with that order that we've been talking about, the phallogocentrism. And so keep that in mind, that maybe your aversion to a particular group is actually part of a tradition that happened at later part through history in their identity being, related to the rejection of a particular revealed truth.
Hmm. That makes sense. I think it's partly just my what would you call it? It's like when your parents are a certain way, who in my case are hardcore Protestants, with a almost fetishization of Jewish culture and identity. You tend to sometimes turn away from that,
Yeah.
become almost the opposite.
Yeah.
You're going to trigger Dave. You said you're Protestant, man. It's like he's going to be on tilt now. Dave, do you want to say anything more?
I mean, I feel like I said a lot, and I again, we're tiptoeing on, as all three of us recognize, and that's why, I don't, I appreciate why you would feel that way, because I can understand, but I think I have couched that experience or that feeling within a framework of history itself that's biblical, of why maybe certain people act a certain way, if you know what I'm trying to say. So yeah, it's a very tricky topic. If you'd like to talk privately, I'd feel much more comfortable talking about that privately.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys. I don't want to take up
no problem, man.
I'd actually love to put some thoughts on this. And again, Dave, like if I say anything too crazy, like I'm not, but if something you just don't want me to go down, just tell me.
Yeah.
I was going to talk about so Nietzsche has a very, very brutal take on this. This is probably one of his most challenging takes I've noticed for Christians. I'll talk about that a little bit. Jung has a take then that is redemptive, like he tries to push against this. Again, these are just me talking about my knowledge and all this type of stuff. You have much better theologians that you could speak to if you want to actually get the proper Christian perspective. So I'll run through those. Like one of them is sort of affirming of why that's a bad thing, I guess you could say, because I was talking earlier, this is Nietzsche's idea. I was talking earlier about the idea that we have the phallogocentric spinal cord of the West right now. And Nietzsche sits down and he starts to point out in a variety of his books like Genealogy of Morals and the Antichrist that the situation in Rome was very similar to our situation now. Of course, he was talking before it happened, but he was basically saying that Rome had, you could say it was a European spirit, it was a Western spirit. And there was the spinal cord of the Hellenic Romans, and Jupiter was at the top of it and all this. And these were all their conception of God and all this, and they built mighty Rome out of this. And they brought in all these minorities from all across the Mediterranean basin. And Nietzsche would actually criticize them for this. He would say they were almost like they just grew and grew and grew without any conception of what they were doing, and they just sucked in everybody from the basin. And this is why this disaster happens. They start to pump in all these immigrants basically from across the Mediterranean basin into Rome. And these people don't have an identity. They're like, I don't believe in Jupiter. Jupiter is Roman. I'm not Roman. And so they have all these troubles in Rome getting to identify with citizens and whatnot. And then they have this moment where they have these people begin to show up in Rome who are saying it's the very same master-slave thing that I was talking about earlier. It's like you could think of Rome as like America, and you could think of the people who believe that they've been enslaved in the past, or Ireland criticizing the English. It's like, you hurt me. It's the slave speaking to the master. You see these people come from Judea, and they're like, you burnt down our temple, you destroyed our nation, and all this type of stuff. And so they start to slander them. They start to say, you Roman, you should be guilty. It's the same pattern that we're seeing now. And Nietzsche points out that same psychology was there. It was the interaction between the conquered and the conqueror. And it was that modus operandi of guilt being slung onto the Romans by the resentful slaves. This is where he categorizes Christianity as a slave morality. Now, these are very brutal takes, because he's basically saying he doesn't believe in Christianity as a consequence. And I don't necessarily think even the ethnicity is that big of a deal in his argument, but more of his categorization of this stuff, and pointing out that it came from a group of people who were oppressed within Rome, who were a minority within Rome. Now, these are very strong statements, but they're very interesting to look at and whatnot. He would use this then as an argument to say that Christianity is not representative of the true European spirit, and he would essentially be like a neo-pagan in the way that he would explain it. He's not saying go back to Jupiter or something like this, but he's saying that like the European spirit is distinct from this, and you can't really understand it until you're able to segregate them out and understand like, oh, we have our own creative soul, that when we took on Christianity, we actually married these two forces together. So what you see in high medieval Christianity is you see the European creative soul marrying to the Hebrew, the Jewish soul, and they blend together and they form a dialectic, and they sort of merge to create something that's actually a weird combination of the European spirit and the Hebraic spirit, which is what he would call Christianity. Christianity is like Greek Hellenism extended, but he would criticize very, very seriously. And he would say that Christianity, when it first showed up, was a nation of the of minorities, the Judeans being a part of it in Rome. And that actually was a part of its fall. Not that Christianity drove the fall. A lot of people say that stuff. These are people who are not reading Nietzsche properly. But it was almost like as Rome got weak, things like Christianity could grab an awful lot more of ground with it. So think of it now. It's like, would America have any problems if Christianity was strong and the Americans believed in themselves? No. But now that we've gotten kind of lazy and sloppy, all these things are starting to swell up, like the woke movement and stuff like this, and kind of strip us apart. So when you see your Protestant parents and all this, like that's sort of a symbol of these people. They're not them, but like their spirit, their collective spirit has kind of lost its will an awful lot, and it doesn't believe in itself anymore. And so his story of this is that like Rome was falling, Christianity latches itself upon this, but 40 years after Christianity, Rome converts to Christianity, it's being invaded for the first time in 800 years. Now, again, very strong statement. He's basically saying it didn't work. Christianity was a signal of its decline, a symptom of its decline, not the cause.
And I would argue that the fact that it was attacked symbolizes, again, the world, that the powers that be. That's why Christ was crucified. But
yeah, there's a lot of different frames you can take in this. Like Nietzsche's definitely not canonical. Like this is how you should view history.
Right.
This is the take.
Yeah, that's.
And I think if you're then dealing with the big hard question, then is like, is Christ divine? Nietzsche's got a conclusive no in that perspective, and that's a brutal take, a really, really brutal take, a really hard one.
And the problem with Nietzsche, though, he has a relativistic worldview, so even him saying that is a relativistic statement, so it's not a truth statement. And that's the problem with all these, again, even a pagan worldview, is you can't begin to root then philosophical transcendentals, and that's where the logic actually becomes important, because how are you going to make a truth statement without the metaphysical grounding for truth to actually exist in a side of a material world that's constantly changing? And
that's very true. And I've noticed with Nietzsche that he's always giving out about Plato as well. Yeah. Because for same reasons. Yeah. And Christianity, if you actually, he says Christianity is Platonism for the people. And so I guess to kind of put it simply is that one of the strengths of Christianity is in that it merges with the European spirit, with the Platonic spirit, and comes up with this extremely philosophically sophisticated perspective in the world. And then this, I think, leads into a very interesting perspective from Jung. So that's very negative. That's Nietzsche's like negative perspective. And Nietzsche definitely is like narrative. He tells stories of history. He doesn't come up with any conclusions. He's like painting pictures and all this. You can judge that whatever way you wish. Like, David would obviously disagree, which is perfectly fine. Now, Jung has some, because Jung was trying to disagree as well. Jung was a believer. So Jung's idea about the divinity of God is a fascinating one. So Jung says that he believes in God because he understands how our minds work. So he would sit down with like an artist, and he would tell the artist to just paint a picture, almost like, free expression. And the artist would start to articulate very interesting pictures when they're painting their dreams that would start to tell stories about the artist's life. And it was almost like there's this part of the artist's imagination inside of the back of his head, is unconscious, that was articulating something that the ego couldn't think of. This is Jung's psychology. And Jung believed that God was speaking through our dreams to us. And when an artist creates something, that's not necessarily just the artist. It's like the voice of God speaking through them. So Michelangelo describes phenomena like this. You'll see it all the time when you start to speak to these type of people. Michelangelo said he saw the stone that he crafted King David out of, and he said that he saw an angel trapped inside the stone that he had to free. And this was, Jung would say, this is his unconscious, his dreaming mind latching onto the stone and crafting something. And so Jung comes up with his theory that there's this hidden force driving an awful lot of our experience in life, and it has its own logic, and it has its own way that it wants to do things. And he points out in Ion, he says that during the time in Rome, it was almost like that unconscious mind chose Christ. The symbols all aligned around Christ. Like, why was it Christ of everyone? Why was it Jesus? He was a fucking bloke from Judaism, Jew from Judea. Like, how does he become king of Rome? And so when Nietzsche negates that, what Jung is sort of saying is that like the collective creative imagination of the Roman people and all the Greek philosophers in the Byzantine Empire and all this, they all began to align with this guy. Like, he was just the right it was almost like the prophecies were aligning, and it was saying, this is the guy. Our European imagination said Christ is the dude. And this is when he spread so easily across all of Europe, because all of our stories just connected with them, and he matched with our imagination. It was like a paradigm shift, and we go into the new world of Christ. And so Jung sort of affirms that this is why it was Christ, because he was chosen for this reason. He was our guy. And then he goes on to, well, he doesn't necessarily say this, but this is my understanding of it. And he understands God as a sort of an ironist. God is an artist. God is an educator. Like if God chose Julius Caesar, that's a little bit on the nose. You know, the most masculine man ever is the son of man. But instead, God sort of picks a slave from Judea who's a nobody, who dies in tragic circumstances. As the Romans used to make fun of him, he rode around in a donkey instead of a horse. Yeah. And this is going to be the guy that's going to evolve man. It's going to educate mankind. God is actively trying to transform us and evolve us and bring us through processes. And he knew that Christ was this next step we needed to go to get to the next level. So like Jung's very affirmative of all this stuff. And Jung's saying God chooses Christ. He chooses to go down as Christ because that's what will actually work. That's what we need. And that's what brings into Europe the moral paradigm. The paradigm that educates us on how to be moral and all this stuff. So these very complicated things. I'm definitely not canonical expert, but there's the two frames on it that I like, and I think they're both very interesting.
No, that's great. Amadeus, thank you so much, brother, for hopping in. We got another brother here with a question. So feel free to hop out. Again, we appreciate your questions, man, and God bless you in your journey. And God bless your family, man.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. What's up, brother?
What's up, brother?
What's up, guys? This is my first time really doing anything like this. It's kind of weird. Uberboyo, I used to watch a lot of your videos before I got into Eastern Orthodoxy. You talked a lot about Jung and everything and being an artist, and I make music. So it's like everything just clicked to me. It's like how do you say, synchronicity? Yeah. I wanted to ask you about Nietzsche. Well, really about both of them, because neither of them have a system of morality to follow. And look around, and the people in control, they're exerting their will, right? Which is what Nietzsche says to do, exert your will. So how do you ground your own morality and say, oh, what they're doing is wrong, when Nietzsche doesn't have a system of morality to follow? Neither does Jung. How do you say this is bad when it's all subjective and relative?
I'm going to get a theological spanking here now. All right. My assertion is quite straightforward. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to be satisfactory for most people, but I understand this from the perspective of life. Like morality strictly in my mind means decision-making. Like, is it right to eat that food? Is it healthy or not? Yes or no? Is it good food or bad food? I understand that that's how we make decisions throughout our life. It's not some type of, like, God is not deciding something about the food as far as I'd understand. So it's sort of like, what is the right decision to make? So when it comes to the question of like, what should I be doing? You're almost always trying to win. You've got your own soul. You've got your own life. You've got your own life force. And we in the West have a civilization that we share where we're all, in some sense, working together to succeed. And we were united through the identity of Christianity in order to achieve this. But we were pushing out into the world, and I think in very amoral ways, like, for example, conquering America and all this involved things that I would say are not necessarily strictly moral. They were pushing beyond these types of things.
Wait, pause. So, how do you
when I see the people in power,
how do you say amoral when you don't have a system of morality to ground it in? How do you know that's amoral? I'm
using these words for the elegance of communication. You know, if you want me to discuss them in more detail, I can. But these are just the way that most people understand them, if you will. So,
most people ground themselves in Christianity, regardless if it's Eastern Orthodoxy or Protestantism. But you're not a Christian, so you saying amoral. What makes you say that it's amoral if you don't have a system of morality?
From the Christian frame of worldview, I think going over to the Aztec world and, butchering people, regardless of what way you see it, is definitely like crossing the boundaries of, thou shalt not kill and whatnot. Now, people may disagree, but It is people going out and conquering, people going out and attacking, assaulting. And there's been many instances of Christians doing this in all sorts of ways. For example, Christianity spread in France with Charlemagne by doing stuff like doing mass killings in Germany of the Saxons. The Saxons, we know them as the Anglo-Saxons. They actually used to be quite a big people in the middle of Germany, but they all got butchered by a French king who was walking around as a Christian, you know? So an awful lot of these actions, by its own internal logic, are extremely brutal. I would even say they're Nietzschean. They asserted themselves upon the world with an amoral energy, if you want to put it from the Christian worldview. Now, I would understand the reason why this is happening is because these people have life instincts and they're expressing themselves in order to succeed. And this is not necessarily a moral process. This is about succeeding. This is about winning. This is about pushing yourself up on the world. And that would be my understanding of it. And to answer your first question, like, how do I justify my perspective versus the people who are ruling the world, if you will? Well, I simply think that they don't represent me. They don't represent us. And they definitely don't represent life, even in of itself. And so they are just not the right people to be in charge. I think it'd be better be me and us and Western civilization, as I've been describing throughout this. Now, again, it might not be satisfactory, but that's the way I see it.
So it's just everybody versus everybody then, because you have your ideal where you say it should be you and your people in control. What if I think differently and I say it should be me and I want to do something similar to what the people in control are doing, but I just change up a little and I'm just like, I'm not gonna make everybody, watch porn and eat bugs. But I'm gonna make it something less worse than that,
No, I understand what you're saying. Now, like, again, Dave's going to give me some theological spanking, right. But I would go back to like the ancient Greeks and describe Heraclitus's perspective. He was one of the origins of the concept of logos, and he would come up with this idea that the war is the father of all things. And what do we mean by this? It's like life is competition. We have this idea that life is about peace and harmony, but it's not. That's not, if you look out into the world, all right, how could you model the world if you understand life as competition? You could say life is in war with death, and it needs to find out the strongest versions of itself so that it can put energy towards them and project them forward. So what it does is it makes itself fight itself. Life, all the lions fight the gazelles, and then the strongest entities rise up, and that makes the most resilient forces against death. And this allows actually quite coherent worldview to understand why we have competition in the world. And so if it's you versus me, yes. And I'd say my ideas are better. This is why I should rule and I should project the world and assert the reality and push things forward, because I believe in myself. I believe I'm representing life, and I believe I'm representing things that are higher. Now, you might disagree. And so we're entitled to go to war with each other, and you might defeat me. And in that case, I have to bow and say, well, this guy has pushed his reality forward better. But this is like, how do we get better at martial arts? The better man wins. Right. We fight, we spar, and then we go forward. And then the best guy goes forward, and then he breeds, and evolution goes forward in this type of way. Again, you might not agree with that, but I think there's definitely logic there.
Now, I would, as an Orthodox Christian, again, we believe life is an uncreated energy of God, so life is not in competition with death, but because of the fall, certainly we could perceive it that way. And, brother, how would you pronounce your name? Is it Nephi?
Nephi, but Nephi. It could be Nephi too.
Yeah, Nephi. So, I actually, you're really almost hitting Uberboyo where I hit him. Like, last time he came on, we did a debate, Eastern Orthodoxy.
Yeah, I watched the video, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm getting spanked.
Before we went live today, I said, hey, do you care if we open it up, have people join? He goes, yeah, no problem, but I'm sure some of the Orthodox Christians are going to come on there, and they're going to start hitting me with objectivity. And so you're totally right. And I agree with you, brother. I think that worldview, but we're all on our own journey, and so clearly you and myself and a lot of the people in the live chat, we've kind of walked this path, and we've chose orthodoxy based on logical, rational arguments and looking at the world. And Uberboyo, he's in a lot better place than he was. What was it? Probably 9 months, 10 months ago. Last time we chat. So, I'll definitely pray for our brother. I know he's got a good heart. Even though justifying philosophical transcendental is still a little of a soft spot.
I'm gonna have to go to the library, guys. I'm gonna have to go to the library and get my chops off. Jesus, getting spanked.
Hey, MG, welcome, brother. Can you? Is it possible to turn your camera on, man?
Yeah, I'm just sitting here listening, brother.
Hey, what's up, man? You got a question?
I'm just as of right now, I'm just listening. I'm just kind of thinking about what everybody's saying and pondering all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead, bro. Go ahead, bro.
This is like, as an artist, what do you feel is the best thing I should be doing right now? Because I'm 19, right? I started getting into your videos before I even got into Eastern Orthodoxy at like 17. So now being Orthodox, but also being an artist, you know, I'm trying to find my path in the world. Like, what should I do? How should I, you know, how should I survive?
What type of artist?
I make music. So for me,
Nice.
I'm able to make rock music. I'm able to rap. I'm able to make literally any genre that I feel I fit into. Like, I could just get on a type beat on YouTube, and if I feel it, if it resonates with me, I can get on it.
Yeah, well, look, if you know, bro, if you're Orthodox, tell stories and just litter them with what you feel like. You know what's going forward with that, what your dreams are, how you're seeing the world, how you're struggling with. I actually found some of my best music is when I capture and sit down and say to myself, right, what's something I'm struggling with right now? Like, how do what's my struggles with Christ? I'd make a song about this, or my struggle with the West and stuff like this. And these would always come out as the best type of things. You find that tension inside of your soul. It gets the right energy. So the very first thing I do is, it's almost like a Jungian idea. You know, you're listening to your psychology, listening to your unconscious, noticing where these great big tensions are inside yourself, and trying to express them like art therapy through whatever song you're making, you know. So the poetry inside of your song is your way of understanding this, your way of kind of moving this stuff forward. And if you're on a spiritual journey, if you're on a spiritual journey, I actually highly recommend you try do part of it artistically. You know, you try to say, oh, I'm struggling to figure out the logic of something like this. Can I tell a story about it? Or can I make music, for example, in your case? And this really, really helps you process this, really, really helps you digest this, really, really helps you move through those ideas. And more importantly, actually, that's the most important thing. But as a consequence, this will tend to bring out some of your best stuff, because it'll be much more honest. You won't be going in with this attitude of like, oh, I have to make it or something like that. You'll be just trying to make really, really good art that explores really sincere questions. And what will start to happen then is you'll start to build up this lovely little portfolio that you can begin to show to people. You'll find people who resonate with you. You know, like, God knows, you could be looking, imagine Kanye West comes in contact with it and he finds this like Christian rapper and he's like, fuck man, I could do what more of these around my parts or something like this. And maybe he'd start getting you involved in the circles, or maybe you wouldn't want to be with him. Like, I get that as well. But you could find people who are aligned with you or something like that. That obviously comes down to the idea of just simple procedure. How does Dave run these? You know, he's just every week he's pumping out a live stream. He's sitting down and he's making sure it happens. It's the same sort of thing. It's a little bit more complicated with art, but you're sitting down and saying, I've got this massive unconscious, this massive dreaming world, this massive imagination given to me by the Lord. And I have all these stories I want to express out of them, and all these emotions I want to articulate. I'm going to make it a project that every month or every week I will publish one song about this and churn this stuff out and stick at that for like 2 years, like a psycho. You're 19, man. Oh my God. Like, you have so much time. Yeah. Just go like a psycho. 2 years till you're 20.
I want to second what he just said. Again, I'm not as creative and I'm definitely not a musician, but you know, my art is rhetorical and it's creating streams. And I'll tell you, the biggest thing that has helped me is just doing it. And doing it and allowing myself to be vulnerable so people can criticize me if I get something wrong. And so what Uberboyo said is like, maybe just try, you know, maybe 1 month, whatever you feel comfortable with, like setting a standard for yourself in regards to creative projects, and just start doing it. And you're going to be blown away in 6 months how much better you are, how much more direction you have in 1 year and 2 years. And that's really the process, because right now, whatever you produce, your best that you can do right now, in 6 months, you're going to be like, man, I can't believe I made that. I can't believe you know, that's how I feel. I can't believe I said that, dude. I'm so much better. And that's the process, is just like, just do it, man. And that's like, I'll say him, you're 19, bro. You're already Orthodox. Like, you've already put these dots together. You seeing the way the world is right now, bro. You're in a great position. You know, it took me all my 20s to figure that out. You're 19, man. You are ahead of the curve.
Yeah, man, the psychedelics pretty much helped me get into that, you know, be like, oh, wow, shit is crazy out here. But, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Where you at, man? You in the U.S.?
Yeah, I'm in Houston.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome, bro. That's awesome, man. God bless you and the family, man. That's awesome, man. I wish you nothing but the best. And hey, you know, reach out to me privately. Let me, you know, whatever your handle is or your social media, like I'll help you, you know, I'll help you promote stuff, especially if it's, you know, Christian themed and you're an Orthodox Christian, dude. I'll help you out.
Thank you, man.
Man, that's excellent. See, stuff like that, man, is just so powerful. So you go, as I said, like maybe you do a monthly cadence and you say to yourself, look, I'm just going to publish something. I don't care if it's even fucking shit, but I'm just going to say every month I publish something. Try to take part of your spiritual journey. Like, I'm not saying turn it all into art, but part of it, try to explore some of your emotions, your struggle through those. Don't go in too much with the intention of making something perfect, but try to just make it really high quality, and it's articulating something that's sincere to yourself. Do it with that type of monthly cadence. Commit for, as David said, like 6 months to a year. I'd recommend 2 years.
Yeah, I'd recommend 2 years too, but I'm just saying, the way I structure my life, I always have a 3 month, 6 month, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10-year goals. Now, I'm not saying that they always stay, but it gives me vision in regards to time. And then therefore every day I feel like, oh, I got to do something, because look, it gives me direction on what I got to do that day. Now, those goals are always changing, but just sitting down and even writing those out, thinking, okay, what's my 3 month goal, 6 month, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10-year goals. And it just gives you a vision.
100%. Like long-term thing at your age, man, you know, your prefrontal cortex ain't even fully developed till you're like 25, you know. So your age, if you can just install consistency, you will dominate everyone around you. You know, just continue, just pump that stuff out, give it till you're like 22 or something like that. See where you stand at that point. You'll be delighted you did it. Delighted. It'll teach you so many skills. You become so valuable. It will, you know, you create that structure inside your life. You get that creative expression. It'll be fantastic, man. So I wish you the absolute best of luck. That'd be amazing.
Thank you. Uberboyo, for you, since you tell stories through your videos, like, is there a way that you improved is there something that you do to improve your storytelling that you do like on a daily basis?
Yeah. Well, okay. First of all, I do get a lot of practice because of the videos. So the videos give me the ability to practice. Like, if you want to get better at fighting, you should spar, right. You know? So it's the same thing.
And that's what my
streams
are. They, you know, it's when I compete with other intellectuals, like in my PhD cohort, this is like sparring to me, like having to read and prepare and then come out here and perform and do a stream. So exactly what, I don't mean to cut Uberboyo off, but exactly that. Like when he makes a video, it's just doing the work is just like sparring. It makes you better every time you do it.
Yep. And like, so if you're aiming to be a musician, the thing that will make you the best at what you need to be is obviously going to be making the music consistently. Now, in terms of the specifics, like the technicalities, there are things you can do to improve your storytelling and understand the nature of storytelling better. One example I'd always say is if you're writing lyrics, for example, you sit down, you're writing lyrics, you can take this idea that try your best to sit down, and when you've got like an image inside of your head and it's something that you can see, try to focus on painting that picture as opposed to explaining that picture. This is a problem that people make a mistake an awful lot of. This is a very fundamental principle in like writing and skills and stuff like this. And so you need to find a couple of those fundamental principles. How can you show and not tell is what this is called. Then go over to music, stay consistent practicing, because it doesn't matter how much you learn skills if you're not consistently practicing, and then take these technical details and install them into your practice, and you will develop, you'll become much, much better as you go forward, and you become fantastic. If you want to develop your skill of speaking outside of the context of music, you would need to think, how can I get a practice of some sort? Daily talking, talking to the boys, talking to your girl, talking to friends, going and doing public speaking. You need to come up with some type of system of practice, some type of way that you're storytelling every single day, and do that. So we have obviously YouTube. You might need something different, depends what you want to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. You feel free to hang out. Christopher hopped in. I was wondering, welcome, brother. Do you have a question or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd probably take a while to kind of hash out, but I saw the original debate you guys had, you and Uberboyo.
Oh, you're talking about like a year ago?
Yeah, and I've some of Uberboyo's. That's how I discovered Uberboyo.
Oh, God.
I was watching some of your channel, dude, and some of the stuff you put out. It's interesting because I grew up with existentialism, like studying in high school and college before I became a Christian. So it's rare to, like, at least in my experience, find other people who are really interested in existentialist thought and philosophers and whatnot. And all over the internet now because it's, just becoming a lot more popular. But when I read Nietzsche in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, as a Christian now, as somebody who's kind of interested in Christian theology, it's kind of like, it almost feels like he's trying to create this new path of deification. I mean, I don't know if that's like, because that's not how I read it, because I didn't know anything about Christian theology growing up. But now looking at it, it's like, it's this path of individual discovery and ascent and this growth in power. And I think about like the chapter on the three metamorphoses pretty early on, where he talks about, the camel and the lion and the child, and the growth of value and power in each phase. So I wanted to ask if you could reflect on that. And the other question I wanted to ask is that, I haven't watched all your stuff, obviously, but you do a lot on Nietzsche and you do a lot on Jung. That's kind of what I've seen. Have you read some of like John Paul Sartre's stuff and Albert Camus' stuff? And how do you think like Nietzsche is sort of a foundation for them, or do you think that that's not the case?
So the first one was Nietzsche's conception, trying to go, how would I phrase that properly? So Nietzsche's going beyond idea. So I guess it's the core of Nietzsche's philosophy, yes, going beyond. And then the second one is about existentialism generally. So yeah, I'm just writing those down so I remember them. The first one you're asking about Zarathustra and how Nietzsche seems to be describing this idea of this new spirit that is trying to, almost like the individualist idea, overcome Christianity and overcome all this and create something new and create new values. So he's definitely trying to do that. Absolutely trying to do that. There's a couple of different frames. I guess one you could say that I find fascinating is Nietzsche's metaphysical perspective, because I don't think people talk about this one enough, because I don't think they kind of conceptualize it that well. But I notice like dudes who are super into him, like spurg out in him like I do, they will see that Nietzsche's essentially like he's like a pagan brought into the modern world. And he has some unbelievably interesting criticisms of Christian metaphysics. Now, again, I'm not very good with that stuff, so I don't know it that well. But he would come from this basic idea and say, it's like the way the Romans would come in contact with the Jews and the Christians and say, these guys are atheists, they would say. And it's like, what the fuck? They say that there's this God in this other world. That's stupid. There's only one world. And he's right here in front of us. There's this reality right here that we see. That's the only world that there is. And this world is the Buddhist idea of samsara is really useful here. Only the pagans and Nietzsche tones that positively. So the Buddhists would say the world is this schizophrenic meat grinder of pain and suffering, and there is no escape, and you're just stuck within this thing, and you need to become enlightened in order to get out of this. And Nietzsche basically is saying, like the pagans, that this world is here, and it has its law of life, its logic of life, and it's there as this big ball of shifting schizophrenic energy, and it's righteous and it's good and it's justified and it's powerful and it leads to beauty and it leads to logos and it leads to order and all these type of things. Now he has a very interesting spin on this, which I think is very much in alignment with the old European way of seeing it, as far as I understand, that the way that mess creates order is that we're all possessed with a will. We're all possessed with an energy. You could say that we're part of life, and that quantum inside of ourselves is trying to express itself creatively and drive towards the beautiful, the good, the ordered, and the true. Now, again, I don't think David's going to be happy with that at all, but that's what he basically does. And we all are, life is all given this, and life is on this quest through reality, pushing itself forward in order to try to become creative. And so Nietzsche, if you start to understand that, Nietzsche's basically saying like, what we are is we're an accumulation of life force, of energy. And when life force and energy get together in a structured way, they become generative and creative and push the project of life forward. And we're trapped. This is the existential side of it. We can't know necessarily where that's going. We can't know if it has been created by God or not, or what's the situation there. We can only understand it from the context of being inside of it. We're not dead. We're not outside of life. So we live within this, and this is what our experience is actually like. And so we should go along with that. We should affirm life, is what he would describe. And what this leads then is to this radical attitude of creativity, this radical attitude of producing things and becoming assertive and pushing things onto the world. Now, there's obviously problems with this because you lead to the kind of radical individualism and all this, but I don't think Nietzsche gets too caught up in that, because I think Nietzsche's natural perspective before we fell into our problems in the West was actually very, very hierarchical and structural. He had he would believe life as a very structured thing, the same way as we look at all the animals, we all have like skeletons and stuff like this. So we'd push it forward in that way. And then Zarathustra was essentially his attempt to try create something new, because he was looking at Christianity and suggesting that it was an expression of the will of Europe for a while, married with Christ, married with all these things, but it's basically gotten stale. This is his idea of God is dead. It's not some, as you probably heard, it's not like I'm Richard Dawkins, like God is dead, all this type of thing. He's basically saying that it's lost its energy. It's lost its vitality. The symbol is not strong anymore. And we need to connect with something that's going to lead us towards life once again, on the same project that Christianity brought us on. We need to go towards that maybe in a new way. And so Nietzsche was trying to affirm that and say, all right, that's the plan, that's the project. Christianity, we don't want to be hateful towards it. I don't want to be reactionary. I think he fell into that plenty of times and wrote things like the Antichrist and all this, but he's ultimately trying to choose something that can push us forward in a positive way. And he has all other things that he stacks on top of this. But that's what he was attempting with Zarathustra and his philosophy. And I think it's a very interesting perspective. I think it answers many questions that I've had about the modern world. Mm-hmm. But again, he's just some random German incel, so I'm not sure if I'm going to build a church to him anytime soon. Yeah,
guys, you can stay here. I just got to read some super chats here. First super chat came from our brother Theoria Zone, keeping the chat in check. Our moderator throws in $5, no comment. Thank you so much, Theoria Zone. Next one come from our always busy Dr. Vagisil, throws in $1 and says, generosity is an overlooked part of masculinity in helping your neighbor cut wood and building things for community and being reliable and honest. And yeah, I think that's exactly something that Uberboyo and I were trying to hit up earlier in regards to that self-sacrifice, building, working together. So Dr. Vagisil, as always, you always have phenomenal super chats for $1. Totally nailed that one there. Next one comes from Maximus Pike, throws in $5 Canadian and says, God bless Ireland.
Yes. Yes. Good to hear, lads.
Earlier we had Mark throw in $7.99 Australian. And then we had two very, very generous super chats. I need to give a special shout out to my brother Bowman 538. Bowman 538 threw two $100 super chats. One that said thank you, and one that said 359 qualitatively raging. And so Bowman 538, I know who you are. God bless you, brother. Thank you so much for the generous super chats. Truly do appreciate it, man. We got to speak soon. Next one comes from Speedrunner, throws in $9.99 and says, first time viewer, just tipping the show. Well, thank you so much, Speedrunner. Hope you enjoy. Welcome. You're always welcome here, whether you agree with us or not. And then the most recent one, the last super chat, came from our good Mongol horde leader, Genghis Khan, throws in $9.99 and says, good job, DPH. But Mongols were actually Christian, though. Well, it depends on what time period. Mongols were pagan. They had a shamanic religion, and then they eventually adopted Islam. But, I know that there's many Mongolians now that actually are Christian. So depends on what time frame. But Genghis Khan, thank you so much for your bloody horde and everything that you do. But that's going to wrap up the super chats, guys. And Christopher, if there was a comment you wanted to reach back to Uberboyo, MG, we're going to kind of wrap up the stream here. I have a quick question for Uberboyo that without going too in depth or deconstructing my question, just a simple, I'll give you a few sentences in addition. But where you're at right now, do you believe in God? Now, I'm not saying the Christian God. I'm not saying you have to be Christian. I'm just saying it seems like it seems like you're in a different place just based on the rhetoric that you've come to a point that there is some sort of transcendent reality.
I've always kind of been there. Like, it's weird. Okay. I was never a new atheist. Like, I never fell into that stuff. Even reading Nietzsche and stuff like this, like, I'm obviously going into it a little bit. You have to be wary that he died insane and stuff like this. You don't want to like subscribe to his perspective. You kind of study it as like a challenge or something like this in order to help you see the world. I do definitely struggle with it though. Like Christ, many of those things that I brought up with that guy earlier, like these are questions I'm always asking myself. Is God, for example, do us Europeans have a specific spirit, which is our God? And this is like a very pagan way of seeing the God. And is Christianity a subversion of that? Or is there like a transcendental creator of this whole reality, and he chose to go down through Christ. Like, these are things I definitely struggle with. But overall, I actually think Jung was very helpful in making me understand that I need to not have to have my ego sit there and try to rationalize it all the time and put it together. I need to like sort of just trust and believe and try to go out and do the things that are like obviously good in my nature, and it will kind of come to me over time. And if it doesn't, even like, as long as I'm being creative and doing the right things are going to work. And it's weird for me to say that, but that's just a feeling that I have, if you want to put it that way.
Okay. And then, guys, you have any last comments before we hop off here?
Okay, so one thing that I've been thinking about here is I seen one of Uberboyo's shorts, and it was talking about the Jungian perspective versus a real Christian's perspective of talking about like a schizophrenic episode with one of their friends, and then the person was thinking that it's like an actual demon that enters the body, and it's what's taking him over, and then from another person, from the Jungian perspective, it's more of like a metaphor. And I was wondering, David, what your take on that is. Like, how do you see that?
Well, I think that unfortunately, due to kind of Protestantism, there has been a rhetoric that if anybody has a mental illness, it is a demon. Now, I think there absolutely are demonic possessions, no doubt, but the Orthodox Church is a little bit slower to go down that road. And so unlike the Catholic Church, which does a lot more exorcisms per year, you can say maybe just Western Christianity has more demons. I don't know. But Catholics do a lot more exorcisms than the Orthodox do, generally speaking. And so just the way that we understand possession and how we would go about a demonic possession, assessing whether it is or not, it's just a little bit of a different process, and it's a bit of a more deliberate, process. So, I have not seen his short, so I'm not sure what exactly his distinctions between the Jungian perception and what he would consider a Christian perception of demonic activity. So maybe you guys can share that with me real quick.
I think it was more of Uber can take it if he...
Yeah. If you want me to be quick with it, like, it's the kind of question that a lot of people throw at Jordan Peterson. It's like, bro, do you believe in this archetype of Christ, or do you actually believe in right? Do you believe in Jesus? Is it the real deal?
And you can believe in both. I believe in both.
I think actually Jung believed the same. I really think Jung believed the same.
Well, he was Gnostic, but I think you're right.
As far as I understand him from reading him, like I believe that he had this. I think he had this way of believing that he absolutely thought Christ was the real deal. Like, he was that was God's way of talking to us.
Right.
But he also believed that Christ sat in the seat of the self, just as Muhammad sits in the seat of the self for the others. I think I'm not sure the exact short, but I think the point I was generally probably making is exactly what you're saying there. Does a Christian sit down and say, what's inside your mind is a real phenomenon? Like, there's metaphysical phenomenon. So if you're having like depression, you're actually infected by something metaphysical. Or the kind of rational way that we have it with psychology, where it's like, your borderline personality disorder, or sometimes with Jungians, it's like, oh, you're suffering from an archetype right there, and it's very sterilized and lifeless in the way that it perceives it. And I think, I think there's something interesting in those contrasts.
Okay. Yeah, I think, generally speaking, I can get behind that a little bit. But Orthodoxy is more hesitant to talk about, because we do believe that there's mental illnesses. Now, how that plays itself out, again, talk to a priest. I am not an expert on Orthodox exorcism, although I plan on having a priest on who is an Orthodox exorcist here soon. And as of right now, Jonathan Paggio will be on March 6th, so I'm pretty excited about that conversation as well. So we'll be able to get into some archetype conversations. But guys, I think that's going to wrap it up. I do appreciate Christopher and MG hopping in. Uberboyo, it's always a pleasure, man. No matter what we have to say, you're always an interesting character. You always have the gift of gab. That's for sure, man. God bless you and the family. Wish you nothing but the best, man. You and your business and your following, what you're doing. Guys, if you're out there, please smash that. Oh, we got one more super chat, actually. Nefe, the gentleman that was just on, the artist, 19-year-old artist, he threw in $10 and said, just sent you a message on Instagram, COTEL. Would love to be in contact with you more about music, orthodoxy, and the gym life, as well as joining the Fire Academy later this year. So bulking and fasting is something I'd like to improve on. Well, hey, brother, I'll check my DMs once we get off here and shoot you one back. God bless you, brother. You can always reach out to me, and I'll get back to you. Can't promise the immediately, but I will always get back to you. So, but Nefe, I'll once we finish this stream, I'll shoot you a message back. And man, God bless you and your music and your art. Being 19 and already seeing the world that you do, that you're way ahead of where I was. So, anyways, Uberboyo, your link, your YouTube channel is in the video description. Everybody who's been here, go give our brother a follow. And is there anything you'd like to leave with the people before we hop off?
If there's any boyos watching, I'll share this. Please give Mr. Church of Eternal Logos here a follow, a subscribe, check him in. He actually does loads of streams, and he brings on loads of very interesting guests, so I recommend you check them out. Thank you very much, Dave. Like, you're always cordial. It's always fantastic. It's always a good chat. This is a fantastic one as well. I think this is a really, really brilliant topic. So, just thank you very much. Thank you very much for doing what you do.
Well, thank you for humming on, man. I always appreciate it. Appreciate your friendship. And Christopher, MG, thanks for hopping on. Everybody watching, thank you guys. Smash that like, and I will be back with another stream actually on Man and Technics, a book by Oswald Spengler, either tomorrow night or Thursday night. I promise that'll be a good one. But until then, as